pleasure to welcome you, and especially those of you, I don't know how many you are. It's not on? It's better now? I don't know how many of you are in the European Parliament for the first time. Some of you? Yeah, well, special warm welcome to you. And to colleagues and to everyone in the audience. So welcome to day 2 of your conference. I understand you had a good day yesterday, and I think you had a perhaps slightly more technical focus. And the purpose of today, which we are very happy to host here in the European Parliament, is to zoom in on policy issues, of which, of course, we have no shortage. And you are in the right place to talk about policy issues here in the European Parliament, legislator for the European Union. I'm not going to go deep on content, because I'm certainly not the biggest expert in the room, and I think that I'm preaching to the converted if I say that we, all of us, in all our capacities as individuals, whether as citizens, as workers, consumers, parents, etc., we have a huge and critical interest in the topics that you're discussing. And by definition, we want our policymakers to get it right. We depend upon them to get things right. And there's a lot of very critical questions that we have to address in a very fast-moving environment. We know that in terms of both how fast the technology is evolving, and certainly looked at from the European Union, we see also that the broader political or geopolitical environment is turbulent and challenging, and those are two quite neutral words, but I could use slightly more extreme words to describe where we are now. So I really hope you have a very successful day ahead of you. I want to say just 1 or 2 words about EPRS, the Parliament's research service. It's a very fundamental mission for us, and it's really the reason why the research service was created, was to deepen and strengthen the in-house expertise that's available to MEPs when they are carrying out their legislative work. And of course, we're lucky enough to have lots of excellent specialists inside the House and in our service. I want to thank my colleague Michael Adam and his colleagues, some of whom are here today, and they've been very much driving the organisation of this event from our side. But we don't know it all inside the Parliament, and we rely very much on building bridges with the academic world and with outside partners, and this event today is very much reflecting that spirit. And I'm happy to see a really prestigious lineup of speakers, prestigious lineup of universities and institutes on the programme. I was supposed to stop there and welcome one of our vice presidents, Christel SCHALDEMOSE. I am going to stop, but unfortunately I can't welcome Vice President SCHALDEMOSE because at the very last minute, unfortunately, she has taken ill and she sends her apologies and regrets. I do regret that she isn't here with us today because she would have been, I think, a very interesting speaker to set the scene. She has been one of Parliament's lead members on everything that relates to digital and to consumer and to digital transformation. So I do regret that we can't hear from her today, but it's unfortunately the case that she's not able to be with us. So with that, all I'm going to say is please have a very successful day, and I hope we create something, we create some links that will continue. Michael, over to you, and I ask you to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome from my side as well to all of you. We are proud at EPRS to be hosting this event today. We bring together some of the best researchers and experts across Europe, and the idea is that we enable an exchange between our experts and policymakers. So please use that opportunity today. If there's questions you have, please go ahead. We will have the interventions of each speaker, and afterwards there's a chance to ask 1 or 2 questions, and then at the end also there will be a block for questions where you can ask those that are cross-cutting or where you can bring up issues that maybe don't relate to exactly one of the presentations you heard. With that, I'll stop already from my side and I'll turn to our experts, and we start with you, Polona Carr, policy analyst in the EPRS. We know each other very well. Polona will speak about current EU priorities in the digital era. And we've been having different approaches in the EU to digital regulation. First, we were looking more at enabling the technology. Then we turned to looking at the risks and address those risks. And at the moment, we're trying to find a balance between those two and reduce the administrative burden. Polona will walk us through those developments, and she will focus on what are the EU priorities in the digital era today. Over to you, Polona.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, I will give a very short introduction on how the EU responded to challenges of technological development by setting digital priorities. So we thought it would be good to give this short even overview before we go into detail that will be given by our experts. The EU has been at the forefront of shaping a human-centric vision of a digital society, which prioritizes needs and rights of citizens. This vision is grounded in European values, which emphasize respect of human rights, protection of personal data, and commitment to transparency and accountability. And the EU's digital regulatory framework also reflects this commitment. So over the past 15 years now, the EU has been setting digital goals. The first digital agenda for Europe in 2010 and the subsequent digital single market strategy focused on technological development, as mentioned by Michael. They laid the foundation for a more connected and competitive Europe by eliminating roaming, setting broadband targets, increasing connectivity, for example. The EU made in that time also a significant progress in consumer protection through privacy, notably by the General Data Protection Regulation. However, as new technologies emerged, new challenges arose, of course, and the EU had to adapt to make sure that the technologies serve the needs of its citizens. Especially the rise of digital service platforms and emerging technologies has increased the risks incredibly for individuals, society, companies, infrastructures, you name it. In response, the second digital agenda for Europe from 2020 emphasized the importance of establishing secure digital spaces, fair competition in digital markets, and strengthening digital sovereignty and setting global standards. In that time, so beginning of the 20s, the EU established also a distinctive digital regulatory framework through some landmark laws such as the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, AI Act, you know it very well as well. And these laws have set the stage for digital transformation, which is rooted in European values. I'm continue repeating that because I think that's where the gist of what I'm trying to say today. However, the EU is going even further by setting ambitious goals, including the Digital Decade 2030 policy program with targets such as 80% of adults having basic digital skills, 75% of companies using cloud computing and AI, all households having access to gigabit networks and 5G, and all citizens having access to e-medical records and digital ID solutions. These targets are underpinned by a declaration on digital rights and principles, which commits the EU to human-centered, secure, and sustainable digital transformation. However, the latest State of the Digital Decade report highlights gaps in the EU's digital progress, including lack of investment in digital skills, connectivity, and AI. And if these gaps will be not addressed, the EU risks falling behind in digital competitiveness and widening the digital divide. To address these challenges, the EU is now prioritizing the reinforcement of strategic sectors, also by collecting investment. The EU is trying to make it easier to do business in the EU and to promote digital tech diffusion, to boost productivity, to make the EU a technological and industrial powerhouse. The new European Commission's program reflects these priorities. An important focus in the digital portfolio is implementing the AI Act, boosting AI innovation and development, but also ensuring fair and open digital markets through implementation and enforcement of the Digital Services and Digital Markets Act. The Commission will also develop a Digital Fairness Act to address unethical practices such as dark patterns, for example. It plans to simplify the complex landscape of EU cybersecurity regulation and to counter disinformation and information manipulation through a European Democracy Shield. These are just a few examples of priorities the European Commission set in the next term that are related to today's conference. And as mentioned by Michael, as the EU moves forward, the focus shifted from creating acquis to simplification and streamlining of the procedures to ease the burden for the companies. So the final ambition is to become the leader in setting the digital standards in AI-driven environment. And this will require input of all stakeholders, including academic community. And this conference gives an excellent opportunity to participate in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Polona. Are there questions at this stage to Polona relating to her presentation? I look around if that's the case. If not, we come to you, Claudio Fejo. Claudio is professor at the Technical University of Madrid and has the Jean Monnet Chair on Technology Diplomacy and Digital Sovereignty. Claudio will talk about AI strategy in the EU. And there is this cycle, right, in AI about, innovation and industrial leadership, how they interplay. You will also draw lessons from China, which is a country you know very well. And you talk about the artificial general intelligence as the new focal point of global rivalries. It's a lot for 10 minutes. You will also talk about resilient ecosystems and and what's interesting for especially I think policymakers here about the importance of local hyperscalers in a world where technological dependencies are so large as they are nowadays. So you have a lot on your plate. We look forward to your presentation.
I'm so glad to be here. So yeah, a little bit of a challenge. So basically, I'm going to try to deliver 10 messages, simple messages in 10 minutes. No, I'm looking at the clock and let's see if I'm able. It will be one about the framework, then like kind of 6 avenues for innovation in AI, and then 3 final reflections, no? As quick as possible. Number 1, the framework. If you want a map of the universe, these days, it's very simple. It's like a circle. Everybody is looking for disruptive innovations based on technology, for instance, on AI. And then next step will be competitiveness. So some industry, some company will use these developments. Next, this is the drag report, productivity. You are able to sustain this competitiveness for a while, then you got productivity. And from productivity, you achieve leadership, if you are good in a particular industry, a sector, or hegemony, like for instance with AI, because AI is a horizontal technology and can transform many sectors. Or, and this is the worrying thing, maybe supremacy, because you are ahead of the rest and they cannot catch up with you. Huh? This is the issue. This is the map of the universe. What is everybody doing these days? Fighting for this initial step on finding these disruptive innovations, particularly on AI. This was number one. Now, 6 ideas on AI and innovation, using some insights from my experience, my years in China, and also trying to apply them to Europe. Number one, the recipe, if you want AI, you simply need 3 ingredients. Number one, computing power. This looks like NVIDIA chips. Number 2, you need data. And number 3, you need talent/algorithms. These are the 3 ingredients. We used to think in Europe and also in China that everything was about computing power. It was being big, no? A lot of muscle. In that sense, we were laggards. We were a little bit behind. And there was nothing to do. In spite of being laggards and being a little bit delayed, we thought we needed our own sovereign models. Why? Because maybe one day they will unplug the code and that will be bad. So you need your own models to use them for reasoning. And second, because there's a little bit of a connection between language and the way you think. No, it's like 80% is general reasoning, but there's a 20% that is connected with the language, culture, and for that reason, we need our own models, no? Because if not, you're reasoning with a little bit something that comes from others. So this was number one way, okay, lagging behind, but still you need it. Number 2, what about if we think about data? This is the world of industrial applications, because you have the general models, but you have your own data in an industry, in a big company, and maybe you can plug this data and do some developments. This is what now Europe is betting on AI factories. So these AI capacities, supercomputing centers will be available typically for SMEs that they cannot afford to have an investment in a lot of computing power, but still they have data, they can innovate, they can rapidly find new things. This is second avenue, and we are trying this in Europe. Number 3 avenue. This is the important lesson from DeepSeek. It is not only computing power, data, it's also about talent. And in Europe, we have tons of talent. Those of us who work at universities, we know this perfectly well. So DeepSeek put a bunch of engineers with a little bit of computing power and some data and let them work for a while, and miracle happens. We don't know if this is a trade or it's just a black swan, no? Something that happens once in a while. But maybe worth to try, because in Europe we have this talent. And number 4, this is a little bit more technical. You know, in AI, basically you have 2 parts. You have the training and you have the inference, the reasoning part. Training, I wouldn't say it's done, but we have good models. And now we are moving into giving more relevance, more importance to the reasoning part. Reasoning means the next wave in AI. All of you, we are already start using these AI agents. They will work for you 24 hours. This is what is going to happen. These agents, they use the second part, the reasoning, the inference part. And the good thing, we still need a human in the loop, because basically they go out, they find something, and you need to tell this AI agent, well, maybe not good, maybe you need to try it this way, maybe this is fine, this is the way. So still a human in the loop, and also it depends on your knowledge. And we've got knowledge. So interesting avenue for Europe, for us, and even for the Parliament, no? If you are interested in this. Next, number 5 in these avenues. AI moving to the edge. So everybody's talking about the cloud, but what if we are able to put these models very close to you? How close? Well, it depends, but maybe in some servers close to your facilities, and then you feel, especially in Europe, much safer, because we don't have super good providers on the cloud side, so this edge is good. Or even it might be in your mobile phones. So privacy, that is also something important. You're connected with European values and our European view, as Polona was explaining, it will be key. We are betting on this, and sometimes when I give conferences, lectures, I bet the dinner or a beer, but you are too many maybe, that there will be a European unicorn on AI on the edge next year. So if you're ready to the challenge, I truly believe this is going to happen. And number 6, important idea, not everything is done in AI. There are new fields worth exploring. For instance, also another experience from China. What about spatial intelligence, so using AI to understand what happens in an image, in a map, in 3D, with sensors. This is much more complex information, much more difficult, and it's not solved. This is something OpenAI, ChatGPT won't help you. These were the 6 avenues, and the last one, remember, there are open fields, there are opportunities, not everything is done. And 3 final reflections, super quick. Number 1, we don't have European hyperscalers. We don't have the Googles, the Amazon Web Services, the Microsoft, and that's an issue. So how we're going to solve this issue? 2 ways. Federating things, federating small clouds. This is what we are trying now in Europe, trying to put together and connecting. We are experts in putting together a lot of countries, so this is the same with data spaces. And also, but still we need local hyperscaler. So Gaia was there, we were trying, but probably we need to put more effort, even if it's public. This is a personal opinion. Number 2, chips. Something that we have learned, also something that I think is important message from the Chinese, in the complex value chain of semiconductors, what you need is a token to play this complicated poker game that the world has become. So we have ASML in the Netherlands, but maybe we got more, at least to try to bargain a little bit, negotiate, while we build our own facilities, our own producers, manufacturers of chips. It will be a key need. And last idea, to be more or less on time, is we are heading towards artificial general intelligence. No? This is how you started. Yes, experts, they think this will happen. But not only this. Experts think whoever reaches this artificial general intelligence will be leading the world for the next 100 years, I don't know, 200 years. So are we able, as Europe, to find an innovative way to reach something meaningful in terms of on AI, but at the same time that is defense, protects civil society, individuals? That is our different approach from the market in the US and from the government approach in China. Are we able to do that? Well, this is an open question. I have my own ideas, but I leave it for the Q&A. And all of this that I was saying is in a set of slides that I think more than happy to share with you, but I thought it was easier to just speak. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Claudio, for making the impossible possible, to talk about so many, so important and deep topics in only 10 minutes. Are there questions to Claudio after this presentation? Otherwise, I have a question. I'll start, because you lined out very, very nicely all the challenges we have in Europe and all the things we need to do. What I'm wondering overall, how optimistic are you that we can achieve it? Because on talent, I think it was quite clear. You have a quite optimistic note. But on things like the AI factories, the computing power, on the data, we have many discussions in Europe. I think there is a lot happening. On the cloud, you said we're trying a small cloud. You know, I would like to hear a bit more. What do you think would we need to do to have really good chances? Also, of course, in the view of artificial general intelligence, that maybe Europe can be a player, because it is still a long game, and we should be there.
I like very much the idea of a long game, because this is a very Chinese idea. So if you look into China and you think when they started betting on these 3 components, computing power, talent, and data, or some sort of opening data, for this, it's only 10 years. It's only 10 years. And the most difficult part is the talent, because this takes a lot of time, no? To have enough of this. And we got it. So talent, we have. Cloud, it will require a strong bet from countries in Europe, beyond the federation, no? Beyond having a small clouds connected in between them. That would require putting, but we got Airbus. It looks more difficult to make a plane fly that just getting some cloud open and workable for everybody. And about data, this is part of, for example, in the Draghi report, and the analysis is really good. The advice, not everybody agrees. And loosening the conditions to access data, I don't think that is so European. That's a personal opinion. However, there's a lot of interesting data, both in the public hands and also in different sectors, different industries. And that will be perfectly possible. And this is the example of the AI factories to put it in place and use it. So I would say I'm slightly optimistic, not super pessimistic.
Thank you very much. I look around if there's other questions to Claudia at this stage. There's a question from the online audience. If you could have the microphone over here. Thank you.
But only it's a difficult question.
Oh, actually, there's no question from online audience, but I had myself a question about AI factories. I was wondering, which obstacles do you see ahead of AI factors, or what do we need to make it a success?
That's a super good question. They require a little bit of money because they are still struggling with the resources, because currently, basically, these AI factories were supercomputing centers. So they were used to work with researchers. And the idea is using the same logic. Logic is you have a research project, you compete for the computing time because your project is better than the others. So the idea is doing something similar, but for companies. Okay, propose something interesting, and we have a limited amount of computing time, and the best proposal will get it. Obviously, if we got more resources, there will be more chances for innovation. This is one thing. And the second thing, that is, it looks small, but it's key. We don't have all the right people to do this, because supercomputing centers were run thinking about research, but now they will be needed to be run because of commercial or business interest. And we need this in-between managers, not so much research managers, but more like innovation managers who have an understanding of the market and at the same time an understanding of technology, so we can rapidly iterate. These people is key, and we need to put them in charge. And this is what I see as a big challenge to make this happen.
Thank you very much. There's two more questions. The lady in the front, please, was, I think, first.
Thank you. So thank you very much for your both presentations. So I'm Sonia Vanier. I'm professor in computer science department at École Polytechnique in France. Claudio talked about cloud computing resources in Europe. So we cannot have digital sovereignty without our cloud computing resources. So do you tell us what is the situation right now in Europe? Do we have it yet, or how far are we for getting this goal, sovereignty goal?
So basically, it's currently it's a disaster. I mean, you run a European funded project. For example, I ran one of those on AI for public services. It looks AI, okay, public services, the core of Europe. And then you need to use Microsoft Cloud, or you need to, that's a disaster. And we cannot afford it any longer. And as I said, it's not complicated. For the time being, we sorted, combining your resources with a little bit my resources, this other person's resources, but this is complicated. There will be interesting innovation because of this federation of combining resources. So on that complicated field, we are ahead of the rest because of our own complications at home. But it's not the optimal solution, so we need to do something. We have Gaia, but Gaia floats around and no one knows where it's going.
Thank you, and I think we have time for one last question. There was one over here, the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thanks a lot for the 10 points you explained. My question was related to what you mentioned about chips. It's true, in Europe we have SML, but chip manufacturing is extremely, extremely expensive. What are your thoughts or your views in how Europe can pull a big chip manufacturing plant? Because we are talking about thousands of millions of euros. Here in Belgium, we have IMEC. Pilot line of IMEC is, I think, is 2,000 million euros, the cost roughly to build that. And it's a pilot line. It's not a manufacturing plant. So.
Basically, if you want chips, you have 3 steps. You have the design part, you have the manufacturing. This is where the famous company in Taiwan, no? Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company does. And then you have a third part that is sometimes forgotten, but it's very important. That is the assembly test, no? And checking that everything works. Think that chips, they have billions of transistors this day, and one single transistor that doesn't work properly, it will mean your car doesn't do what it's expected to do, or a missile hits some other place. So that's an issue. So what we are trying to do is slowly capturing some key elements of this value chain that is very complicated, about 50 steps. We got a couple of them. No? In Belgium, for instance, we have something interesting. We have the ASML in the Netherlands. Now we are trying in Spain to put this assembly part, because it's maybe the one that is easier to reach, because the barriers and the IP is not so complicated. And slowly being part of this card game, of these bargaining negotiations, while we need to have some local manufacturing. That is impossible to avoid. We need that part. But meanwhile, if you have something, some critical bottleneck, at least you can bargain. Okay, I'll give you this, you give me that. This is what we are going to try. We are gaining time, simply. We are winning time. We need 10 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very good questions. And now we come to Andrew McStay. Andrew, you're Professor of Technology and Society at Bangor University in Wales. And you will speak about AI for human interaction. And that is a lot about AI companions, especially in emotionally sensitive contexts. That's something you'll focus on, about the potential they have, but also about the ethical challenges and the risks. Whether the frameworks, the regulatory frameworks we have are sufficient, and you will also speak about the role of soft law and standards, which is an area that you're working on yourself. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yeah, today I guess I'm kind of speaking in something of a dual role. I'm an academic, I'm conducting social science on technologies that emulate human empathy, but I'm also chair of an IEEE standard called P7014.1. Essentially, this is an international working group that's providing international guidings regarding AI systems that emulate empathy. So the idea of the talk today, I guess there's kind of 4 points. One is to explain some of the good and some of the bad implications of AI technologies that emulate empathy, what we're doing about it, the status of the law, and why technical standards can be legally and socially valuable. So admittedly, if you've not come across this idea of empathy and AI before, it's an odd one. It's very counterintuitive. You know, when we think of empathy, empathy is something that people do, computers do not do. So perhaps just a kind of working definition of what we mean by empathy. So empathy essentially is the capacity to recognize, interpret, and respond to the feelings, intentions, and experiences of others. So when performed by a machine, we kind of say that this process is considered an emulation of human empathy. It's not equivalent to the emotional and cognitive processes found in people. But I take you back to that original definition about recognizing, interpreting, and responding to the intentions and experiences of others. So already you think, well, maybe there's kind of something in this kind of this AI idea. So in terms of what our focus is, particularly on the standard, we're looking at an overlap. So picture 3 circles. On the top left, you've got general purpose AI. So essentially that's kind of AI systems capable of performing a wider range of tasks across different domains. So general purpose AI here. And then we have empathy, or at least emulated empathy here. And then the third circle is products marketed as partners. And we could use assistants, we could use chatbots, we could use companions, we could use co-pilots, we could use assistants. We've got three circles: general purpose AI, empathy, and chatbots. And in the middle, there's us, and really interested in that overlap in the middle. So in terms of some practical examples of what we're talking about, just kind of hands up in the room if you've come across the service Replica. Okay, a few. Let me try character AI. So there's a few in the room here. So perhaps the best way to think about this, in terms of this idea of empathic partners or empathic chatbots, they're things that exist on our mobile phones. They're things, I guess, that we could encounter in mixed reality. And they're things that we encounter on our desktops. But basically, the long and short is still the same. It's AI systems that are emulating empathy. Now, certainly for kind of those of you who have come across the character AI, you might be aware of the suicide of a young boy in the US. And I'm seeing a few kind of head nods in the room, who committed suicide after spending a long period of time interacting with this AI system. The question of whether this AI system caused the suicide, it's a legal case ongoing in the US, it's very debatable. But what the case example shows is this idea of forming relationships with very, very sophisticated AI systems that seem to be able to gauge our emotions, that seem to be able to understand our perspective and respond accordingly. We seem to be moving into kind of new territories and a new water here. So basically, we've got ethical problems, but equally, we've got governance questions as well. And I think all of this has to be considered in relation to the AI pacing problem. So many of you here will know the AI pacing problem, particularly those who work on policies, that this kind of relationship between the speed that technology moves and the speed that policy moves. And arguably, there's something of a problem here. So I talked a little bit about kind of this idea of AI companions, such as character AI. But it's not just character AI. This idea of empathy, general purpose AI, partners, we can think about it in context of education. So kind of companions, chatbots, partners that essentially kind of personalize educations, reacting to emotions and reacting to what is deemed to be by the AI system to be the experience and perspective of the students. We could be thinking about this in relation to ghost bots. So ghost bots being this idea of the digital afterlife, where kind of a system is trained on large amounts of personal data, essentially to kind of recreate somebody who's passed on. These systems also have implication for pornographic settings, which, again, not kind of one that comes up that often, but as we all know, this is a common usage of the internet. So the idea of kind of personalized avatars that kind of empathize and reacts to the disposition and interest of the person, you begin to see where this is going. And of course, you mentioned agents as well. So agents also kind of very much involved in the work environment as well, offering usages, offering kind of real-time interaction. So all of this, all of this is kind of moving on apace. And one of the things with my social science hat on is kind of interested in the UK. What do UK citizens think of all of this? What do they think about this proposition? So, unsurprisingly, younger folk are maybe just a little bit more aware of kind of what AI companions are, using kind of, AI systems that, that we're all familiar with, ChatGPT and so on. This is kind of day-to-day stuff. But what do kind of older members of the population think who, dealing with these ideas at a propositional level, not really come across them? So we did quite a bit of survey work in the UK. We sampled a representative survey of the whole of the UK. And I think it was really interesting responses because on the one hand, I guess kind of the broad contours of the survey is that younger people kind of tentatively in favor of some of these applications. Older people in general hated the idea. And there's basically there's a curve, not basically a line that just kind of goes straight up from kind of young people, slightly more kind of okay, slightly more accepting, older people hating the proposition. But I think one of the things that we found, and perhaps this is a key takeaway, is that across the whole survey, people in the UK thought that people should not be interacting with empathic AI partners until over the age of 18 plus. And for us, that was kind of really interesting because that included even kind of younger folks. So people who are kind of 18 to 24 who responded to the survey, even they said, you know, really you should be kind of over 15, between 15 and 17, before you're interacting with AI systems that are capable of kind of emulating empathy, gauging emotion, human disposition, and all of that kind of thing. So that was quite an interesting takeaway. But I think the other part that was interesting for us as well was findings around this idea of kind of anthropomorphism. So some of you will have kind of come across this word anthropomorphism. Basically, it's about kind of systems that kind of mimic or kind of emulating living people or living creatures. You could talk about zoomorphism and kind of emulating animals. But basically, it's copying, mimicking humans. And the UK populace, we asked lots of questions about kind of what type of design cues were people okay with. I expected basically just kind of a line of responses that said, yeah, we like anthropomorphism or we don't. But we actually got quite subtle responses saying we like this, but we don't like that, and we like this, and we don't like the other. And I think from a policy point of view, that's really interesting. So I don't know if you've kind of read the annex on prohibited AI, which is kind of the annex to the AI Act. It came out a couple of months ago, and that offers really useful guidance on what the Commission means by emotion recognition, but also what the regulation should be on AI companions. And again, that had some quite subtle thinking in relation to anthropomorphism. So basically, in short, the survey that we did really tallies well with some of the recommendations in the annex itself. For sake of time, I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit. But I think, you know, in terms of these technologies, which are quickly appearing before us, the question is whether kind of hard law is kind of responding quickly enough and appropriately. And I think certainly for us in the P714.1 group, who, you know, trying to build guidance around these technologies, there are kind of areas and topics and issues being missed. And I think this is necessarily so because the EU AI Act can only anticipate so far. It can't pitch too far into the future. It does have to deal with what is coming down the line, but only so far. And I think this is where things like standards and soft law can play a benefit, they can play a role, because they do have that anticipatory function. They can take a chance. And that's kind of certainly what we've been doing within kind of the technical standards that we've been developing. We've mapped out kind of all the harms, potential benefits, uses. You know, all along the way, we're kind of diagnosing and finding things that are not addressed kind of in law. So certainly in terms of kind of how hard law and soft law can work together, we certainly do think that kind of that the hard law should be making use of soft law, but only that includes international soft law such as IEEE standards. So for the sake of time, I'm on my 10 minutes, so I will stop there. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for this fascinating presentation and for staying within the time. Again, impossible task achieved. Yeah, I mean, it really shows it goes so much beyond just this idea of, you know, a teenager thinking that AI is their girlfriend or their boyfriend is really a huge topic. I will first see if there's questions before I ask you something. So are there any questions from the room to Andrew? Yes, here in the front there's a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. Really appreciate your effort, also your contribution to the IEEE standard. My question also...
introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Meng Liu. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm affiliated with IEEE, Institute of Electronic Engineers, European Public Policy Committee. So I first try to clarify the term people use AI is in a very fuzzy way. So for good or for bad. So basically from technical perspective, it is just a programming plus statistics. but the use in your survey, my interpretation is people interpret it as a chat box or some other products to help them to write if they can't write. So it's nothing to do with, so the term itself has nothing to do with intelligence. So if you use the term AI, aging or young, relatively younger age, do you think the reason is that nowadays people, anyway, it's a social animal, people need some type of interaction, so people have a channel to use a chat box instead of, let's say, you said relatively older people, they have another pattern to spend their spare time, right? You just fill in your 24 hours, whatever you are doing. So could that be the reason how you analyze this result?
So if I understand the question then, the question is, are we getting the results that we do, that there's kind of a younger people interest in these types of technologies because they spend more time with technology, whereas kind of older people less so? The short answer is that we can't make that judgment. It's a quantitative survey, but to speculate, I think certainly kind of on the basis of kind of wider work that we've done in this area that includes both quantitative work and qualitative work, it's just basically kind of openness to new technologies, openness to interacting in new ways. But I would add to that, because sometimes, when we talk about kind of media and kind of AI, we say, well, the kids don't care. They're happy to give all their data. They don't think about this stuff. We've never found that. We've kind of always found that kind of younger people are interested in interacting in a new way, but still have significant concerns about kind of where their data goes, how it is processed, and for what ends. So I think for us, it's, I don't think we kind of quite find that in terms of kind of that, the kind of kids are okay just to share whatever. But I think on that kind of broader question about kind of digital social networks versus kind of human social networks, possibly. So one of the kind of motivations for kind of one of the surveys that we did was about kind of social loneliness in the UK. This is, of course, a global problem, including in China as well. Places with kind of very, very kind of difficult kind of political and social setups. The findings are the same, that younger people experience kind of more social loneliness than older people. And you might think, well, maybe that should be reversed, that in terms of kind of older people losing loved ones, children moving out from home, all of that kind of thing, and it's not. It's kind of social, younger people who are experiencing more of this. But I don't think that really explains the appetite and for kind of interacting in new ways. So I see those as two separate things. So one, you're right, different types of social networks. Younger people might have more connections, but it doesn't mean they're actually connecting in meaningful ways. But I don't think that explains why there's an openness to new technologies and interacting in new ways.
There's a question here in the front.
Good morning. Maria Ortiz-Zunga, Fusion for Energy, head of project engineering unit at the European Agency. So I've been following this topic from a distance because we don't use it, as you can imagine. I'm not a personal user, so I don't know the details. But I have been following the legislation and the general purpose code of practice for AI as an expert. How do you feel, or what do you foresee that should be legislated or will be legislated in Europe, or guidelines even only, to tackle the risks of emotional AI agents?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big question. So emotion recognition, certainly kind of in early drafts of the EU AI Act, it was up in Article 1 in kind of earlier drafts. It's been a really kind of prominent issue and prominent topic. And similarly, chatbots, oddly, kind of, at least kind of in the drafting of the Act, kind of actually quite low. And then everything happened in November 2022, OpenAI kind of released ChatGPT, and then everything changed. And I think it's interesting to kind of look at the Act itself, which has particularly carve-outs for kind of areas such as education, where emotion recognition is an absolute no, and similarly for the workplace as well. In terms of kind of our kind of UK findings in this area, we do see quite a bit of appetite for uses of these systems and technologies in education. While emotion recognition principally applies to biometrics in the Act, these systems also, kind of measure things like voice and prosody and the ups and downs of voice and that kind of thing, making kind of experiences. So I think there might need to be kind of some possibly potentially even some kind of revisiting of that. But in terms of kind of guidance itself, again, I think, the Annex on Prohibited AI does offer some kind of subtle thinking around companions. And seems like that part of the Annex was written relatively quickly, but it's a subtle piece of work as well. I was kind of really pleased to see that. So in terms of kind of extra guidance in this area, I see the extra guidance as playing a supportive function. So for example, one of the kind of the concerns that we have in relation to companions is this idea of reality detachment. So things pointing to the experience of kind of people who are using these technologies. Other kind of more subtle guidance would be in terms of how these technologies function. So for example, currently the way that these systems work is that they're kind of optimized for people to disclose more about themselves, more intimate aspects of themselves. And the reason that they do that is to extend engagement. So you have depth, get people to say more about themselves, that's more meaningful, stuff that's emotional, stuff that's about, kind of our experiences, perhaps nerves about giving a presentation today, for example. And that extends engagement over time. And it means that the interaction isn't just surface, but it's something that's deep and goes on for a period of time. That kind of stuff isn't covered in the Annex, and it's certainly kind of not covered in the AI Act itself. And that's kind of something that arguably that kind of standards can play a role, because there are technical things that you could say, do this, don't optimize for this, optimize for that instead. That's where kind of standards, I think, can play a role.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the question. I look around if there is one more question in the back.
Hi everyone, my name is Eleni Mangina. I'm one of the professors in computer science at University College Dublin in Ireland, but I'm also the IEEE chair for the P70 16.1 standards on ethical educational XR metadata. Now, as a European citizen and also with my academic hat on, it's a question for everyone actually in the panel. I've written white papers and I've seen what should be, shouldn't be done. But my worry is that we don't look at the problem, not the problem, we don't look, there's no problem. There is just a digital transformation in the society that's happening at the moment, and we need the regulations. But my personal worry is that we don't look at it in the holistic approach. So we say, do that for the AI agents, for empathy, etc., etc. That also causes a lot of problems because AI contributes to the emissions for the environmental sustainability. Is there any movement that will be initiated from EC or from your group so that we can have, as Europeans, a holistic approach, so the one initiative doesn't negate the other initiative? I'm also working on energy efficiency and AI. So at one side, I have the infrastructure and I have the needs of the software and the data centers. And on the other side, the citizens' needs and the social sciences. But will we have a holistic approach so we can all work together? We're all working for the same purpose for our society. But the result can only be positive if we all work in a holistic approach. Do you have any opinion on this?
I'll try. Yeah, so I think, and good to hear that you're chairing a standard as well, so you'll face many of the same challenges that I do. And I think the challenge for us has been to maintain specificity. So, for us to try and design a standard on AI for good, we won't do that. You've got things like SC42, which is arguably better kind of position for that. And maybe that's just the job of law as well. Maybe it's not for technical standards to be doing that. So certainly we've kind of thinking we can provide maximum value to society if we go specific. But in our deliberations, there were just kind of some areas where we just call it, some things are just too important, to leave, not to mention. And certain kind of environmental costs was one of them. So we do make specific recommendations. And again, some of the recommendations are quite general in nature, but some are quite specific regarding, for example, kind of accuracy thresholds. So, we know that, in terms of kind of AI accuracy, it's an exponential cost in terms of kind of carbon, and when we're if we try to get the AI system to be that small kind of percentile, perform better, sometimes you just don't need that level of accuracy. So we kind of make practical recommendations in that area, along with others as well. But yeah, we do on climate in particular, and a couple of other areas as well, where we say this is too important, not to mention a more general point. But in general, we're aiming to be specific.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the answer. I have an additional question based on that. We also have figured out with many Horizon Europe projects that we have taken on board that there is a delay from the point of policy and regulations down to the whole layers of citizens, ending up with citizens on the ground. So, for example, academics or teachers in education that the students are using AI, for example. And we should have the regulations and recommendations yesterday, but right now they're in real need of regulations. So, for example, teachers, what is the acceptable use of AI in education? Which is in assessment, for example? Is there any time frame? Is there, that's again for the panel, for the whole panel, I'm not just targeting you. Is there any time frame? I know there is the digital strategy for education policy, but this is very high level. Thank you very much.
Yeah, certainly kind of within the standard. We've kind of been making some recommendations around education, but that more general question about kind of what Europe should do about AI in education, I'll leave that to others.
Thank you very much. So before we move on, just one interlinkage I would like to make already, that at the end we'll hear from Olivier about age verification, because of course there's a lot of links to what you explained, Andrew, about what age is the right age to start using these things. So we'll hear about that from Olivier at the end. But now I turn to you, Simona Ramos. You're assistant professor at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. And you will speak about open source AI models as software. Now, the AI Act, as we know, has some exceptions for what is called free and open source license. So open source, we hear a lot about it. Free is also an element. You will tell us a little bit about that. We hear about less about that. There is an active policy debate going on, but there's still no clear definition as we speak today. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. I understand that you advocate a rather strict understanding of what is that exception, but tell us about it.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I'll take a half a minute just to say thank you for organizing this event, bringing together policy makers and people from technology, from those of us who work at this very intersection. I think we appreciate being able to be given a platform to hear about our topics from different opinions and different expertise. I will say that in this workshop, yesterday and today, we touched upon a very different but very important question, also regarding AI. We heard how AI is used, the impact it has, and the dangers it can pose. But we still haven't touched upon what is AI and what are maybe some of the fundamentals behind its not only just development, but also evolution. This is not the first time we have this question. It's something that we can also relate from the history of software. First, as you probably know, there was a proprietary software, and then we saw the evolution of free software and also open source software. This development just did not only define how software is built, deployed, distributed, but also how society and people relate to software. In this session, I would like to explore a bit more on the parallels between software and AI, as such, from the premise of the AI Act as well. As you probably know, open source software is one of the major driving force behind the development and economic, behind innovation and economic development. Over the past decades, we saw the evolution of open source software and the bringing of some of the maybe most important collaborative works, from browsers to operating systems to programming languages, etc. So open source, we know it's all about open access, and free software, it's about freedoms. The Free Software Foundation, or Free and Open Source Software, FOSS, as we relate to in academia, has helped define a more broader understanding of what is free and what is open source. So free software as such defines 4 main freedoms, and software that enables these freedoms to users gets the license of being free. So there are 4 freedoms. The first one is the right or the freedom to run a program as you wish for any purpose, can be a business setting, personal setting, academic setting. The second one is the freedom to study how the program works and be able to change as you wish. The fourth one is the freedom to redistribute copies of the original software, and the last one is the freedom to distribute a modified version of the software. So the idea is here to not only, as I said, to define what are the freedoms, but also how users and society relates to them and how they're empowered through this. The AI Act, as you know, also wants to focus on the innovation and user empowerment that open and free source AI brings to society. So it actually grants, as you mentioned, certain exceptions to some of the requirements, including the reporting requirement, the need for technical documentation, etc. All this with aim to empower users, to bring more transparency, accountability, and innovation. So in our study, we find certain problems that arise in practice rather than in theory. One example that we witnessed today is what has been labeled as open washing in academia, which is basically models being released under the premise of, or under the promotion of open source. However, they're open in weights only, or most of them, including the Meta Llamas 3.0. So, while some of them may try to qualify for this exception of requirements, we see this danger and a potential of open source washing. So it is important to know that while maybe they can be open in certain components, they're not free at all because they don't grant these 4 main freedoms that I mentioned. However, the problematic we see here is also because the AI Act, while it encourages the disclosure of other components of AI, including training data sets, training code, etc., it does not mandate for their disclosure. So this is actually a problem to consider something being free if there is maybe not a strict requirement for the disclosure of these main components, mainly the training data. The second problematic we encounter is that in the AI Act, I think it's article, actually I'm not sure, I don't have the note here, is between 2 and 25. They talk about the different entities that are regulated, including the providers, the deployers, importers of AI systems. However, models that are simply made available for distribution under a non-commercial license without any party responsible behind for their sale, including, maybe we can make the analogy with DeepSeek here, appear to fall outside of a direct regulation. So now imagine a developer who creates an AI model and shares online. in some country abroad for people to use, but it's only, let's say, open in weight. So there are critical parts of the system that are not disclosed to be able to be analyzed or, audited, etc. So here there is another danger of not only open washing, but the inability to not be able to inspect, to study, to modify the system from the side of freedoms, and also from more safety and security side, the auditing. So to be on time, I will say that the key takeaways that we have in our analysis is that first, we can learn from software development and evolution and apply these principles in AI. And we also suggest maybe a more of implication of these 4 freedoms, and we actually say 4 freedoms to 4 A's. So we argue for transposition of these freedoms in the AI setting on accessibility, which means, this is on the policy side, to ensure that all AI components, or the one that are necessarily to be used and able to be used by anyone. Availability, which is not only have the APIs or weights open, but the full stack to be made public, and accountability to provide clear responsibility of how AI systems are developed and used, including with their potential implications, and of the auditability, opening the key components so that effective audits can be done. So going more from black box audit towards white box audits. I will conclude with one, maybe a debate question, which is if open source and free software, it's all about acknowledging, crediting the contributions in software. Shouldn't we also extend these principles to AI, where users, in maybe more indirect way, but they contribute with their data, many times private and sensitive data, to as a fuel that shapes this system? So should we give them some kind of contribution and rights? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simona. Fascinating presentation and a big question for our audience. So maybe let's start with that before we ask questions to you. Does anybody have a view on Simona's question? Wants to come in spontaneously? Otherwise, I'll open the floor for questions to Simona. I think, Simona, your topic is really closely related to the implementation that is happening right now of the new AI Act, and that's a lot is in the details. We heard that also from other speakers, and of course there was a reason to have this exception in the AI Act, to have a striving open source community, to have new innovations building on what's already there, and all this is of course jeopardized if we have things like what you call open source washing. So I think it's really important to keep the finger on these developments and keep watching it. So I think it's very topical at the moment. I would like to see if there's a question from the audience. Yes, please. There's one here in the front.
Yes, thank you for the very interesting talk. Having seen the evolution from machine learning to artificial intelligence, I think the machine learning was actually a representation of knowledge in models. Artificial intelligence is a representation of data, of the data on which we train, on the biases in the data, on the on everything of the data. So with your questions, are we actually going to pose again the knowledge representation in AI? Are we going to seek for that in a way to reverse engineer where is the model coming from the data?
Sorry, I don't know if I understand your question. Whether we should?
So to have an explainability of what the models are, an openness, to see, to be able to act on it, to modify. It basically, we require same features of an AI model as we had of the features of a machine learning model or an algorithm, which was actually a reasoning, an expression of our reasoning. A human engineer would create that. AI is actually a representation of data, of information that we get from that. It's a bit less than a reasoning map.
My comment on that would be in parallel with what we are arguing is that, well, there is a lot of amazing work being done on explainability. I think we saw some yesterday, that to be able to be granted these freedoms and also to inspect, recreate, modify, and change the model, you need the data as such. Also, well, from the policy side, the AI Act, if I'm not mistaken, says that, for example, GDPR should apply. So all these rights that are given to us as data providers as well should apply. However, the application also from technical part is quite hard. It's not the first technology. We have seen this in blockchains as well going on. So the AI Act actually says that there should be some disclosure on data, but it's usually a summary of what kind of data is used. What we argue here is more the actual training data sets being given. So I don't know if that answers. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My question is maybe for all of you, because in the computer science research community, there are two ways to think about how we should do the future research on AI. There are part of my colleagues who think that we should develop more and more things on LLMs, generative AI, and use them for everything, despite the cost and the risk this brings. And so if we go through that, it means that also our future colleagues, professors and researchers who will hire will also be in this field and educate our students and the future developers in this way. And there is another side in the research community which has another opinion, and I really agree with this second opinion, on which we really more need to think much more about how to build the models and how to create and develop more efficient algorithms to design a smaller AI agent, more smarter, and how to make them collaborate efficiently with bringing different disciplines from computer science and applied math, bringing optimization, symbolic AI, and so on, and also hire people and educate researchers and our students in this way. So in my opinion, we are in at one point that we have to choose on which direction we would like to go. And so I really want to have your opinion on that, and what are the positions of the European Union on that.
It's me or somebody from maybe Polona? It's more... Well, I think it's maybe more from the European Union side to I don't know if Polona wants to answer in this.
Claudia has it.
Yeah, of course. I don't speak on behalf of the European Union, although I work a little bit for the European Commission, I must say. Look, let's be Chinese. Okay, so I said we need to keep on doing large language models and stuff because, okay, this is useful, but we also should bet heavily on this second way. So I fully agree with you, no? Symbolic reasoning, next challenges, next avenues. Why? Because then we have chances, maybe, because we have talent and ideas to be leaders in this other type of AI, maybe the next generation of AI. However, I must say, the challenges remain. I mean, it doesn't matter if we go this direction or we go the other direction, although probably the second direction is even more dangerous because it's closer to the way we reason, the way that we behave as human beings, and therefore everything that is challenging happens in this second direction. But at the same time, I think we should bet on that heavily, while we keep on running on the other side. Don't forget the first side.
Maybe I can just add on this also. Important part that I forgot to mention is that when it comes to open source and this ability to avoid some of the requirements, high risk categories of in the high risk category, like AI systems that fall into this, including general purpose AI models, are not able to avoid these requirements. So technically, the incentive is not there, even well. You can publish open source, but you cannot avoid the incentive. So maybe here it's also a debate of whether we want something like this being openly published.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Just one very kind of brief answer to that. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. So I think, for example, in relation to all the empathy stuff that I talked about, you could think in relation to kind of therapeutic chatbots, for example. You might think, well, large language models, even with kind of tweaking, fine-tuning, they're still too unpredictable. You might prefer kind of a rules-based approach, and that is kind of some of the decisions that some companies are kind of making in this area, that they prefer something that is much more controllable than using large language models in kind of highly sensitive areas. So yeah, it could be both.
Thank you. We have questions from the online audience, I understand. Okay, so we take that one and then we come to Neringa. Yeah, one last question.
Hello, there's a comment and question from the online audience. Anna Baragin, assistant professor at UC Louvain, working in AI for medical imaging, is commenting, I am in favor and support for open source, yet the medical device regulation hampers or makes very difficult to use and share in-house developed software. So people are turning to buying AI models from companies where we barely know how the model has been trained. What are your views about that?
Thank you. Well, it's a very good question. I think it goes to the point that I mentioned in high risk categories. There maybe more on the direction of using proprietary software over open source. Well, open source in general, software that has been published as open source is considered to be safer from security side, from the side that there's many people looking at it, so they can inspect it and see if there is any problem. Again, here the debate is that, is it better like that, or is it better that we have companies who are going to test, check before the systems are deployed, but they're going to keep them closed? So I guess in a discipline or environment such as the medical one, it's a question on more on the possible consequences on safety, on security, etc., and the benefits we get from open source. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And now we come to Neringa Gaubine. Neringa is assistant professor at Vilnius University, Faculty of Law. And well, we hear a lot that Europe is over-regulating and under-investing. Especially with AI, we have this statement a lot. You will now examine for us whether the AI Act is a catalyst for responsible AI development or rather a barrier for businesses to actually grow and to apply AI. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a great pleasure to be here. After 10 years, I am coming back to European Parliament. I've been a trainee here, and it's a fantastic opportunity. Thank you for the organizers for such a brilliant panel and full audience. And today I'm talking from a legal perspective about surviving or thriving, the AI Act and its legal implications on businesses. AI Act is already here, and we have to live with it. and is the first world regulative effort by European Union to govern artificial intelligence, aiming to ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability. We shouldn't forget that, these core aspects. And the core challenge of AI regulation is finding the balance between regulation and innovation. As the architects of this act claiming that cars drive faster with brakes. So maybe regulation like brakes should enhance security without stopping innovation. But the fact is, Emmanuel Macron once warned Europe that we over-regulating and not investing enough. And this could lead that you risk becoming a cheap tech talent pool for United States and other countries, rather than global leader in AI regulation and innovation. And I examined whether the AI Act is a catalyst or it could help to thrive in the long term. Fact is, business face increasing compliance burdens, also for high-risk systems. Also, David Rogers, leading author with digital transformation, once told us that digital transformation should be business, not tech-driven. The AI Act, however, places legal obligations before businesses' realities. So demanding extensive documentation, as we know, compliance assessment, and risk management processes that disproportionately burden startups and SMEs. A fundamental issue that was overlooked in EU regulation is data quality, you know. The famous saying, junk in, junk out, remains critical. AI is only as good as the data was used and trained on. While computing power continues to grow exponentially, data, the fossil fuel of AI, is reaching its limits. Unfortunately, we have one internet. Businesses that want to harness AI full potential must invest in high quality structured data. Those that lack this is facing not so good consequences. And European Union is very forward-thinking in Brussels effect, as we know, where EU regulations influence global markets beyond its scope, expected to extend to AI also, shaping global compliance standards. This extraterritorial impact means that companies worldwide may be forced to align with EU requirements. While this could position the EU as a global regulatory leader, it may also push AI companies to develop products elsewhere, in jurisdiction with fewer restrictions and regulations and stronger investments. But what European Union is serving for us regarding these regulations? Let's look at the numbers. Action Summit, we all heard about it in the first beginning of this year, that 200 billion is to this technology development and 20 billion to infrastructure. Also, no plans to discuss the AI liability directive for 2025. Also, we had discussions on simplification of the GDPR requirements. And these mean that EU is committed and determined to become a global leader in the long term in AI. Also, private initiatives say that EU digital sovereignty should be leading this way. Business always asks us, what should be the silver bullet for them to thrive and to get the best results? And it should be, as our research saying, AI literacy. It's in AI Act, and it applies to all AI systems and all the developers and all who uses AI in daily basis. So starting from what AI is, how it works, what is the regulation, what are the pitfalls, and what are the opportunities by this, should be the main goal for all the businesses to thrive in digital world regulated by EU Act. I think I'm faster than 10 minutes.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Naringa. Very good. And as you started, sometimes cars with brake drive faster, so you were very fast. But I also retained the statement because that's something, of course, that maybe characterizes the EU's approach to many of these digital technologies. I mean, there is more rules often in the EU than in other places, but the hope is, of course, and the idea behind is that they're good rules which make sure that in the end there is proper development also of technology because the framework is right. So thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions from the floor or from the online audience to Naringa? So you've answered the most difficult question and there's no second ones. Congratulations. As I said, okay, we were too fast. Okay, we have two questions on the left side, please, the lady in green.
Good morning. I think I've presented myself already, but Maria. So the AI Act does regulate about risk in certain things, right? What I feel that we're missing from the community is maybe data to be able to further refine that regulation. So for example, hyperparameter declaration and all these things. I don't know if I'm going into too technical terms because I see your eyes, but basically declaring how a model is in terms of configuration, layers, all these things, right? These tuning that we do to models to get that precision or accuracy. What is your view on that?
Thank you for the question. I would like to see two things. First, AI Act is not carved in stone. It could be changed, it could be amended, and other thing, we need core decisions about implementing it. Still, we are not yet at the final stage of implementing AI Act. We don't know how it works. What would be the recommendation? What would be national governmental institutions, how developing it and regulating it? So we need a little bit of time. In a year and a half, we will get all the document full implemented. So we'll see how it works in practice. Before that, it's really hard to say. We can only give opportunities, to give one position, other position, and other thing. But to say how it will be when it would be fully enforced, it's too early, a little bit too early to say.
Yeah, my question was related because you mentioned several times during your presentation that the European Union wants to become a leader in AI. For sure, we are going to be leaders in regulation, but to me, the question goes deeper in the sense we don't have any frontier models now. How do we become leaders in AI without frontier models? Frontier models are these models like Llama, etc., like the models developed by Amazon, Google. well, we have Mistral, okay. Yeah. But I mean, what I mean is like the big players, or we don't have several, we should have several in my opinion. And the more barriers we put to bureaucracy, let's say, this is hindering this. And actually, well, I mentioned Mistral, but I think now the CEO of Mistral moved to Silicon Valley. So you see my point, right?
Thank you. I understand your question. Firstly, I'm repeating, not a saying that EU wants to be a leader. Like in fintech stories and for GDPR, AI thrives for leadership in AI regulation that all other communities will adjust to our regulation. So that would be forward thinking that they will adjust and comply to our regulation. Or maybe in the future, we will also lower our standards. It's difficult to say at this point of view because, for example, GDPR, it became global standard already, but still we're thinking about lowering a little bit GDPR requirements for SMEs and others, because it's really hard to comply. And only big companies can thrive in this situation. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, this question of the Brussels effect in terms of AI and AI Act, I think this is going to be, of course, one of the, there should be a topic maybe for the next conference. No, I mean, that's going to be one of the really big questions, what's taking precedence there and if there will be this Brussels effect or whether it, you know, it gets much more fragmented and there are indications to that as well. I come now to you, Olivier Blasi. You're a senior professor at École Polytechnique in Paris. And Olivier will talk about digital identity and age verification in EIDAS 2.0. So you will explore some innovative approaches to age verification, and you will focus on approaches that prioritize privacy and data protection. So the idea is that these are methods that where the user can identify themselves without having to give additional data for that identification. And what's going to be very interesting at the end is also that you will then talk about the potential of EIDAS 2.0 of the regulation in that respect. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and thank you for organizing this conference. So digital identity is a topic that's coming more and more because we want to, I mean, regulation is coming also to the web, and 20 years ago we were saying on the internet nobody knows your dog, but the problem is now nobody knows who you are on the internet, and when you try to access services, sometimes you are required to be able to check who is trying to access and whether they are allowed to do it. So if we look what's happening right now in Europe, you have countries that have system on digital identity. So of course we can think of Estonia, where it's quite developed and you can do many things like accessing services, but also authenticating documents with your name and so doing digital signature. You have countries like Belgium, where you have a start of digital identity, and other countries that are lagging behind. If you look throughout the world, you have many countries that are trying one form or the other of digital identity. So India is coming quite quickly because that's where you have the biggest population using digital identity, but South Korea have nice implementation. In Canada, you have a province-based digital identity. And so we see that we have many approaches on how to do it. And first, in fact, even between countries, there's no clear definition of what is a digital identity and what are you going to use it for. Is it something that citizens are going to use only to access public services? Is it something that you want to open to various companies? Do you want them to be able to do more than just proving who they are? And so, for example, authenticating documents. When you think about digital, and so those are questions that you need to ask before saying, I want to do a digital identity and I want to do a policy for this. When you think about digital identity, you want two kinds of properties. First, you want security. So it means that you don't want users to be able to forge an identity, so pretend someone they are not. So that's like in the real world, when you have an ID card or a passport, hopefully no counterfeiter are able to create a new one. And what happens in the digital world, you also want to be sure that the person pretending to use a valid identification is the person on the identification. So those are challenges that you need to consider in your choice of technology. But the other part that happens to arise as a more stringent problem with the digital identity is the privacy part, where in fact, when you are paying in a shop and you are showing your ID card because you are using a check and you want to prove it, you are revealing information about yourself, but there are just one person locally that is able to know who you are. When you use your digital identity online, more and more your data is going to be gathered and processed by many intermediaries, and so they'll be able to build a profile about you, and that's something that you really don't want to do if you want users to trust your system. And that's the part where if you are a crypto answer and you are just going to say, I want to use an anonymous credential system and I'm done with it. Except that that's a nice academic approach, but that's not going to work in practice. But what you want is that your user, when they are going to try to prove their identity or prove they are going to be allowed to access to some service, they are just going to provide the minimal information that you need. So that's what GDPR called minimization. And so in the context of age verification, you just want the user to say, I am above the threshold or not, and nothing else. And that's the part where what EIDAS is doing by proposing a credential wallet is great, because it's going to be able to let users pick whatever they want to disclose and nothing more. So for age verification, the approach is coming back with EIDAS, and in fact, you also have a public consultation about DSA right now about the specific case of age verification. And that's something that, in fact, should have arisen already with GDPR, because in GDPR, Article 8.1 says that to access social media, you need to have parental consent if you have children trained to access them between 13 and digital majority, let's say, so that's 16 by default, and countries can lower the ceiling a little. And in fact, so you should have been able to do proper age verification even before. And so in France, you had legislation for adult website and adult content where you needed to do this. And with the French Data Protection Agency, the CNIL, we tried to provide a proof of concept to show how it can be done. And in fact, to show that you can reach maximum security and maximum privacy, at least privacy good enough, so that user can trust the system and not afraid of leaking personal information while doing so. So to do that, we use standard cryptography tools, and by standard, I mean not something that appears in an academic papers 2 years ago. It was things that were more than 15-year-old, so that it's not cutting-edge research, and companies are not going to say that it's not sure, it's not safe, we don't really know how to implement it. I mean, it's things that you can take any computer science student, they can implement it in one afternoon, and that's doable. And so the goal of this was to show that providing anonymity, at least a high level of pseudonymity, in fact, to user is within reach. It can easily be done, and the extra cost for the user is less than loading an extra web page. So it can be done on whatever you want, on your smartphone, on a very old computer, that's going to work. And in fact, it highlighted what later on our politician called double anonymity. And so that's in fact, the properties that you want when you are using some kind of credential online. The service you are trying to access should not be able to know who you are. They should just know that you are allowed to access the service. While your identity provider, which can be the state, which can be companies that has been delegated the power, should just learn that you are trying to use your credential, but they should not learn on which particular website you are trying to do so. And that's where we can come back to EIDAS2 and how it works. So EIDAS2 says that you should guarantee privacy for the user, which is great. You have a marvelous typo in the English version of EIDAS2, and they say that you need to provide unlinkability. So by context and by using the other translation, they meant unlinkability, which means that when you are showing twice your credential, someone should not be able to know whether in fact it's 2 times you, or if you are 2 different users, which is great, but not perfect, because You can link, for example, how many E you have in your name. Technically, that's not linkable because there are many people that have 2 E in their name, but still you are providing information about you. And if you imagine a vote, a public vote where you use this kind of credential, someone can analyze the result of the vote, see that nobody with 1 E in their name voted for this candidate and blame you if you have one. So that's a property that's a step in the right direction. That's expected by EIDAS, but that's not perfect. And okay, once you've done that, still EIDAS is setting a proper rules to have a unified approach to digital identity in Europe, and so that's a really good thing. And you should try to think what you want from it and how you're going to use it to propose a good digital identity. And so you want various properties from it. So first, you are going to use to implement a system that's going to be deployed in 2 years, let's say, let's be hopeful. The problem is we are right in the post-quantum transition right now, where you see more and more national agencies that are saying your system should be resilient to quantum computers. You have standardization that are happening in the world, and for example, the NIST had a competition where various schemes were selected, and that's great. Most of the schemes were made by European academic researchers, so that's a good thing. But this also means that the identity that's going to be deployed in 2027 for the first version should in fact be compatible with this, because otherwise by 2030 you will need to switch to a post-quantum solution, and in fact you're going to deploy something to users and tell them in 3 years in fact it's bad, take something else. And if you want trust from the user, you should have a system that seems stable for them. So that's one part that's very important, because even if there's no quantum computer right now, you can always have a company or a state that is going to collect all the data access, and later on be able to decrypt this access when there's a quantum computer and gain insightful information on you. And if you access some medical website to take an appointment to an oncologist, they will gain access to what was your state 10 years ago, but that's still relevant information that can be used then to rate against you. Once you've done that, so you need post-quantum, and that's nice because Protect EU, that was published in April, says that digital identity is one of the particular topics where you need to be sure and be quantum resilient. The other thing is that the solution that you deployed is going to be some kind of delegation of the power of the state, of the union, to the companies in charge of the deployment. And when you have a passport and you have a contract with a company that is printing the passport, if the contract fails for some reason at some point, you are not going to be able to produce new passport, but your users are still going to be able to use the identity documents that they already have. If you do a digital passport, a digital identity, if at some point you are relying on a company that's not in the EU and the president of the country in which the company is based decides to cut the access to the server between the EU and said company, possibly 100 million of users are going to be without a digital identity, and that's going to cause a huge problem in Europe. And so in terms of resilience, you need to develop a sovereign solution that's based in Europe and that can be cut off by someone outside. And yeah, and so to wrap things up, if you want to do something about digital identity using EIDAS 2, it's going in the right direction, and that's great. You should just think about the future and try to guess what you want about the identity. So you need to have a post-quantum resilient solution. You need to think about privacy of the user, because any accident at launch will cause mistrust in the user and they won't use it. And if we look at what happened in India, where you had lots of biometric data for users and the database were hacked, and that was a catastrophe. And so in terms of regulation, here what you want is, in fact, stronger guideline in some way, so that users know on what to rely and to help company go in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for this run through a very complex field. So I think you laid it out very, very well, which are all the elements to consider. It's complex, but it's so important and so relevant for our safety online. I found that very interesting, that it's true that there are so many different sides that you need to protect yourself from. You know, everybody thinks about, yes, of course, the website that I sign on is not supposed to know more about me than I'm supposed to, but then, yeah, you have the identity provider who then knows which website you were on, as you explained. That's another thing. In the third case, maybe also the tool that allows you to prove your identity will know more about you than you might want. So it's really difficult to find the right solution. I also retain the post-quantum aspect. I think that's something for most security solutions nowadays we need to bear in mind. So thanks a lot for that. I think it was really very inspiring. From the room, are there any questions to Olivier? There's one question in the back, the gentleman in the back.
Yeah, or maybe is it possible to ask a question to the panel at large? Yeah, so maybe I'll stand so you can see me. Jukka Manner, Aalto University. Yesterday we had a technical part of this seminar series, and in my talk I was referring to AI, which seems to be the acronym today by most of the speakers, referring to AI as one of the biggest environmental catastrophes humankind has ever created. I know people missed the heartbeat yesterday, probably some missed also today. Now, if you look at the data, so in Ireland, more than 20% of the electric energy is going to data centers. Finland is at 1 or 2% currently. In the past half a year, the new data center projects are eating 10-20% extra energy consumption in Finland. If you think about, so that's just energy consumption concerns that are, insane if you think about it. As we discussed today, AI needs computing, needs energy. All that energy consumption comes from servers, GPUs that need to be manufactured. So electronics and chip industry is not really green. The emissions related to manufacturing these servers are just phenomenal. Not to mention the mining industry, and of course Europe doesn't have much of the mining needed for this electronics industry. So with this short introduction, coming to the question, so I was wondering what is done on the EU level to understand this development, to do something about this black development related to ICT and AI and data centers, so that we don't end up in a situation where all the world is running their data centers in Finland and everybody else is warming their buildings with, firing wood or, stuff like that. So this is really a bad direction. All the data is showing that. Thanks.
Thank you for that one. Any volunteers from the panel on this question? It's a big one, of course. It's behind everything that we're discussing. Of course, the general rules at the EU level, of course, but you know that about emission trading and all these things, they apply, of course, to the use in data centers as well. But yeah, there's a question also about the trajectory, like how much growth will there be in the consumption? That you highlighted quite scaring numbers. I think it's a major concern indeed. Does anybody want to come in on that question from the panel? Claudia.
Maybe you can say something. It is a challenge or a disaster, but it's also an opportunity. In Europe, we can set up standards. I think, Andrew, you were saying something like this, no? Maybe we don't need to reach the latest super fine-tuned reasoning. It is enough, a little bit less, and then it uses less energy. Also, we can push research on the direction of being more sustainable and models more efficient. This is something that is happening. Also, this movement towards the edge, this is something also that Europe is betting a little bit on. So it will be all of this enough? Probably not. But at least I think there's an increasing awareness and maybe an opportunity for Europe. This is the only thing I can say.
Okay. Are there other questions? You would like to come in?
I don't have an expert answer, but the question certainly kind of deserves attention. And just to say that, of course, it's not just kind of what we're burning, but it's the water that we're consuming as well. I'm in the UK, which famously left the European Union, but we're kind of facing exactly the same things, in particular Ireland as well, which of course is part of the European Union. But just to say that I don't have an answer for you, but just to say that the question absolutely kind of merits attention. And it will be interesting just to see the overall mapping out. So it's not just, for example, looking at the physical side of this, but to connect the question with the political side of this as well. So I think earlier there was a call for kind of holistic answers, and I do think it is kind of worth assembling teams to address this question, because clearly it's a complex one.
Maybe a small compliment. For instance, case of Spain that I know rather well, data centers are moving in our direction basically because, in spite of blackouts, energy is much cheaper and also more sustainable. No? It's solar and basically wind, and this is an opportunity. But we need water, so there's still room for improvement.
Thank you. Yes, there's a question from the online audience, I think.
Yes, Fabiana Dapieve from Post-Quantum Cryptography Unit at the European Commission is asking, what is your vision about the strong difference between the speed with which the EU acts in AI and the speed with which the EU is rolling out post-quantum cryptography? Any advice for policymakers?
I can try for the post-quantum part. How can I say that nicely? The EU on post-quantum takes its time. So it's nice because at least, I mean, the US led the way with the first standardization, but what we saw is that still it's European researchers that are at the core of most of the standards that are being proposed, and EU took a more passive approach where they look at the scheme and propose some of the scheme and say evaluate some of the scheme and didn't do a proper selection, but just said those are nice. And basically now we think they waited for the result of the NIST competition, and there's going to be hopefully a new communication soon saying that whether they agree or not and whether there are other schemes that they want. Then if you look at freedom of recommendation from ENISA or national agencies, they are saying that you need to prepare for the transition. And compared to the US, the European agencies are saying you need an hybrid approach. So it means that you are not going to take all your cryptography that is pre-quantum and replace it with post-quantum. They are saying that you need to have both. So that if the new kind of math that we are using to do post-quantum is broken, in fact, we can rely on what was before. And we are also using the fancy new technique so that a quantum computer won't be able to break it. So we are trying to get a double layer of armor. And I think on this, it's a good approach because it lets time to see what is happening and for the dust to settle to be sure that the new hypotheses are good. I think it's not exactly the same context as the AI Act because we already have cybersecurity protections that are in place and the principles are going to be the same. And so we don't need to or put new regulation. It's just we need to use new standards and get cutting edge security. But that's like what was before when we switched from outdated encryption to newer kind of encryption where we just don't want things to be broken. And so on this, EU is more ready to update for cybersecurity, even if it seems to be less active because we don't have a big act that appears.
Just, if it's working, just to add on the first question on the speed of development of regulation, my opinion is that technology will always be ahead of regulation. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe we think that we can regulate everything and then technology will improve, things will change, and other loopholes will be found. So I don't think the way to go is to make super strict regulation because technology will always be developing, especially in a sector such as cybersecurity. We see more new threats developing with new technology, new attacks coming up. So I think there is a lot of work, but also a lot of potential as well.
Thank you very much. Claudia also has a very short input.
Yes, super short. There's something about post-quantum, but it's not the only technology. It's also quantum key distribution. There are two technologies. So post-quantum, basically, for people non-experts in the field, it means you are going to use algorithms that cannot be broken by quantum computers. But we are not sure about that. So this is an avenue that typically the US is taking, but in Europe we are taking a second one, that is this quantum key distribution that is based on physical properties. So this cannot be broken in any case. It doesn't matter that you have quantum computers or not. And this is also important for European sovereignty. So be aware of this development where also the European Union is going forward.
Thank you. Are there more questions either to Olivier or to the panel at large? I look around, there were a lot already discussed. Yes, please. Online audience, I think.
It's not actually from online audience. I haven't introduced myself yet, but I'm Maria Niestad. I work with Michael Adam in Digital Policies Unit. And I have a question to Olivier about digital identity. Well, when the regulation was adopted, then it was emphasized that it is voluntary. And we saw that during the negotiation and just after, there were a lot of articles about citizens mistrusting this wallet. Do you have any recommendations what to do with these people who will not trust it, who will not, in any case, they will not want to use it?
I mean, you will always have people that are going to be scared of new technologies. They are still citizens and they should be able to access all the services anyway. And so you still can try to work and gain their trust. And so you will not be able to convince everyone, but if you are trying to show that you followed guidelines, that you complied with GDPR, and so you thought about privacy by design, and things like that, you're going to gain the trust of some user. And it's going to be a snowball effect where you're going to gain the trust of some users that were mistrusting the system. And if there's no incident in 1 year or 2 years, then you're going to have more users and so on. So what you should do is that the first version that's going to be realized should not be a prototype. It should be something that's fully functional and that has perfect, or at least more than ideal concept of privacy. Because if you release something that's workable because you wanted to make the deadline, but in fact that's not still proper private and you have a big hack that's coming in 1 or 2 months, then it's going to be a problem and you're going to lose all the users that are mistrusting you forever. And in fact, they're going to manage to convince other users not to use the system. So I think that's one of the cases where, in fact, it's nice to be slow and take your time. And if you want to convince users, it's better to release 6 months later, but something that you know that's going to be secure and that was not rushed to be finished.
Thank you. Very good. So that brings us to the end of this first panel today, just in time for the coffee break that you're, I'm sure, all expecting. I would like to thank all of our panelists for the really great presentations and the great contributions to the discussions. I would like to thank all of you for asking so many good and relevant questions. And also I would like to thank Juan Antonio for all the organization on the academic side of this whole event, and my colleague Polona Carr for the organization of this day too in the Parliament, which was also a lot of work. So thanks to all of you, and let's have a coffee. There's a second panel. Please be back here on time. What's that?
So Mikhail said I had to take care of organization, so this is organizational point. Unfortunately, it's not possible to have coffee here for various reasons. So those who wish to take a coffee break, you just need to take the lift to the 3rd floor. There is a bar there directly, but make sure that you come back by...
Please be back 11:15.
11:15, okay.
It's the members' bar. It's exciting experience. Once in a lifetime.
Okay, so, now it's fine. Good. Yeah, so I was saying welcome to the last session of EUDTP. That's a session on the impact of data platforms, AI technologies, and regulation. So I will take the opportunity, since this is the last session of the whole conference, to make a very quick recap on what are we talking about now and what have been talking about yesterday and today, right? So Sarah Shale presented in the welcome speech this morning, mentioned that this is the day 2 of the conference. So we had a day 1 yesterday, which was indeed more technical. And kind of the motivation for the conference and kind of the topics that we addressed yesterday and we will be addressing today was not just about technology, raw technology, AI, automation, digitization, etc., but also some, I don't want to say hidden, but sometimes overshadowed angles on technology. And we wanted to address 3 of these overshadowed perspectives: infrastructures, energy and materials, and data. The session today, the 6th session of the conference, is going to focus on the last one, on data, right? Data, you have probably heard this saying that data is the new oil. I used to hear it a lot. I don't love the metaphor. I think it's not perfect. And more importantly, it's not complete. It has a bit of that, but data is also a kind of a hidden currency. And a hidden currency between users which are also at the same time consumers of services for which sometimes they pay, sometimes they don't pay, but they are also providers of data, and they are also citizens. They have all these roles together. So data is kind of a hidden currency between them and operators. And the role of operators is also becoming increasingly blurry. They have a role and they have motivations that are economic, but sometimes also become political. And sometimes, with the current context, this is becoming more clear, they are also geopolitical and strategic. So it's important to kind of put in light the role of this currency, not only as an oil that is indeed fueling, as it was said in the previous session, AI, performance, automated services, etc., but also a currency, so a means of exchange between users, citizens, providers, and operators that may have different conflicting motivations. So one great thing of the EU, and that's something to say in here, of course, is that the EU has recognized this role of hidden currency that corresponds to data, and has produced, the EU and the member states has produced a substantial amount of regulation to address different aspects of this currency, of this exchange. So there is GDPR, there is DSA, there is the AI Act. Some of them have been already mentioned. We will be mentioning them, of course, during the session. And this regulation itself becomes part of the process and interacts itself with the landscape, right? And this is something that was said as well before in the session. Regulation is not written in marble. It's a process itself, and it interacts with the environment, with the landscape, meaning that it modifies it and is modified by it. So this interaction sometimes is promising. Sometimes it happens in unexpected ways, and it's important to understand how it happens, what is to be corrected, what is working perfectly, what can work better. So just we have a panel of great speakers that will be addressing different elements of this interaction between regulation and data. I will be presenting one-on-one as they talk, but we will be addressing, as you see in the program, aspects related to disinformation, related to dark patterns and manipulation of consumers, we will be addressing aspects of personal data and exploitation of this personal data that may not be fully shared, and identifying sources of conflict between this data that is collected and copyrights or privacy rights that are enforced, right? So we will start with the first of these talks. So I will invite Gloria González Fuster. Gloria is a research professor at the Brugge Universiteit Brussels, and she's a member of the academic board of FARI, the Research Institute for AI for the Common Good. And she will be talking about digital rights and the risk of personal data collection and inference, focusing on the case of gender data. So, please.
Thank you very much. I hope it still works. Yes. So it's a pleasure to be here. I heard that yesterday was a rather technical day. My talk will not be very technical. It's really about law, policy, so it's about data and gender. First, a short introduction. Who am I? I'm a research professor at VUB. I'm a data protection expert. I think I can say this confidently. I work on personal data protection law, the GDPR. This is my life. So that's the center of my academic interest. I'm also very interested in gender, not really because I've been studying gender, but because for personal reasons, since I was very, very young, I think it started when I was 3 years old, maybe started before, but I don't remember. People have been confused about my gender. I don't know why. For me, my gender is very clear. I'm female, in case you were panicking, now we don't know. I'm female, I've always been female, but regularly people have been asking me, like, what are you exactly? Especially children. Children are very dangerous people. What are you? What are you? And people have been confused. They are regularly confused. Sometimes they are not confused. So since I was very small, I wonder, like, why are people confused? Why are people so strange that something that is clear to me is not clear to them? Sometimes it's clear to some, not to others. So I've been thinking about this question of gender and how people are very strange, this for many years. Then I started working on data protection, have an interest in technology, been following many conferences, many exhibitions, many things. And one day, many years ago, I was at an artistic exhibition. They were very happy to announce facial recognition and all these cameras that are smart cameras that can tell many things by looking at you. So I was with a friend. The friend passes by. We know that this is your age, this is your gender, this is what you are. And then I pass by and I say, your age, we are not really sure. Your gender, we are 90% sure. We don't know. We don't know. And I was trying to take different poses, like maybe you should know. But no, the machine didn't know. And then I thought, oops. So people, the human beings, I cannot really trust them. Maybe machines, I also cannot really trust them. Now what happens? Where are we? And then I started thinking about this relation between data, gender, and personal data protection and gender. So I've been trying to think about this for a while. Beyond the fact that it's interesting personally for me, I think it should be a major theme for many people, this intersection between data protection and gender. Why? Because data are everywhere, you know this. This crowd knows that data is everywhere all the time. Because data is everywhere, personal data protection is also everywhere, and some people don't like it and they complain data protection is the law of everything, but indeed, because data are so important for us to do anything, personal data protection are also very important for us to actually really manage to do these things, to be protected, to be free in many things that we do. A very simple example I like to give lately. My name is González Fuster. There are some Spanish people in the room. In Spain, it's González Fuster is normal. In Belgium, it has never been a problem. But for the ADS experts we have here in Belgium, it's me. An application, and in the app, it says González Fuster. But at some point, somebody developed an interface that would only send González to whoever asked what was my name. And then my name appeared everywhere as González. And I was supposed to click, is this your name? And I said, no, my name is González Fuster everywhere. It is not, I don't know why I have to forget about history. So I said, no, my name is González Fuster. And they said, well, it's writing it's me, but the interface, it says it isn't. Because of that, at some point, I couldn't vote. So I couldn't I couldn't confirm this was my name. I couldn't vote. I couldn't travel because to get the monthly discount, you need to be verified by ISMI. It was it's a problem. Just to tell you how can you be affected by these inaccuracies, problems with your data, but I suppose you know this. Data protection, very, very important. Is gender very important? This is something that perhaps is worth insisting. Perhaps you don't see it. I think the magic of gender is so pervasive. We are always, all the time, assigning people to genders. Maybe you don't realize this, but when you enter the lift, without thinking, you realize if the other person, what could be the gender of the other person. In a way, you adapt to this. We are really assigning gender to everybody all the time. We can think we treat everybody equally, but still we adapt for social norms, and we are being assigned to gender by people regularly all the time. So it's very pervasive, and it's also pervasive in our relations with the online world. Maybe you don't know this, but the internet is assigning you, in many cases, a gender. I will try to come back to this. So data is everywhere. Gender is really everywhere, and it's pervasive in our societies. Normally, we only think about this when we go to the bathroom. Yes, but here I go here. But really, it is very, very important. It has been like this for many years. In a shopping mall, you have the men's wear and the women's wear, and you are supposed to know where to go. So what is now the intersection between data protection and gender? Before we go there, there's an important point that I have to always insist on. So gender data is protected by personal data protection, by the GDPR, but gender data is not regarded by the GDPR as sensitive data. And I think most of the people know that the GDPR protects all data because they are personal data, if they are personal data. And some categories of data are like sensitive data, special categories of data. Racial and ethnic origin, that's special category of data, special protection. Health data, special, very sensitive, special protection. Sexual orientation, sensitive, special protection. All these categories of special categories of data, sensitive data, one of the main reasons why we give them special protection is because we know they have been historically used to discriminate people. We don't want a database of Roma people in Europe because we know that could be used to discriminate. Now, which is the category that is very often used to discriminate people? Thank you. Gender. Gender is very often used to discriminate people, so you think, well, it should be a special category of data. It isn't. As we are now in the European Parliament, when the GDPR was being negotiated, somebody at the European Parliament said, maybe we should include gender identity as a special category of data. It didn't work, so it was not included. Gender is not a special category of data. We have now some case law that is quite interesting, that in some cases when gender, if it's the gender of your spouse, it could be a special category of data to the extent that we think that this might reveal your sexual orientation. But otherwise, gender as such is not a special category of data. So we have to think about how is then this gender data protected. And what you can do with this gender data depends very much on how this gender data is processed. And basically, to simplify, there are three possibilities that I summarize. I think I still have time. I summarize in retrieving, getting from somewhere, collecting, basically from the data subject, and inferring, just when you try to figure out, often using AI, what is the gender of somebody. So these three possibilities, they also reflect some of the main disparities in the conception of gender that are around, because I managed to speak a few minutes without insisting on the fact that, of course, there is a lot of controversy now about gender. I suppose you have heard about this. Again, we are in the European Parliament, huge political debates about gender. Can you have more than two genders? Again, to really simplify this debate, let's say there's one way of thinking that will say you can choose your own gender somehow. Probably there are more than two genders. It's not just limited to female, male. There could be more. It's up to you. You're free to choose. Let's oversimplify this perspective. Another perspective, no way, there are two genders, male and female, and the real gender of this kind of idea would be the one that was assigned to you when you were born. That is naturally there. Of course, we know nothing is naturally there. For somebody to say this is naturally there, they have to have been studying biology or something has to happen. But these different conceptions of gender are very important also when we think about which kind of gender data are we using, which kind of gender data can we use, and how it can be used. So if you think that the real gender is this one that was assigned at birth, the only way for you to collect and process real gender data will be to retrieve this data from not even the passport, but really from the birth certificate. So we have now this idea that even your passport is probably a lie because maybe it was issued by a state that thinks there are more than two genders. Just go to the birth certificate. Unless you were born recently, the birth certificate will be two genders. When you collect the data, it can become more interesting because it means that you are asking people to tell you, as a controller, their gender. You can then choose how you ask this question. You can say, tell me, are you a female or a male? Or you can give them more possibilities, and we have seen this in the past years online. I think at some point there were in Facebook like 65 possibilities that you could choose the gender, non-binary, trans this, many, many possibilities, and the greatest possibility, blank space, you fill in your gender. This has an implication when we think later about what are the rights that you have about this information. Can I change the birth certificate information? Well, probably it's more difficult than just changing the gender data that I gave. So that is about collecting data from somebody, and I think the most interesting part, less well known, is this inferring gender from people. And this is something that is really happening a lot, that has been developed for many decades. I started doing some research about which kind of AI is used to actually assign gender to people. And I found a paper that was quite interesting. Maybe you are this kind of technical people who invent things without knowing what's the purpose. And really one of the persons wrote a paper, I'm inventing this system to assign humans to genders. I don't know what's the purpose because I think people are quite good at actually knowing the gender of people, but maybe somebody will figure out a purpose. And now we have systems to assign you to a gender based on how you walk, on how you look, on how you talk, on how you write, on how you type. Everything can be used to assign you to a gender. And this is all being used. For instance, when you think about major platforms, Amazon, for instance, does not really ask you your gender. And I was one day curious that Amazon not know my gender, because they have been selling things to me, and I thought, if they want to sell me something, it seems maybe they want to know my gender, because it seems society thinks you can have to, it matters. So I did an access request using the GDPR to Amazon, can you send me my data? And at some point I saw that Amazon Prime Video something said I was female. And I thought, I'm not even using this Amazon Premium Video. Why do they say I'm female? So many exchanges with Amazon. And eventually they said, well, it's the algorithm, this is calculated based on your name. And I thought, oof, lucky, I have an easy name, Gloria, it's fine. But of course, if like my colleague Simone, you're Italian, I don't know, always people getting their gender wrong. So big platforms like to infer your gender. Why? I don't know, probably because they don't have to ask you. Probably because they don't have to even tell you you have been assigned to a gender. They just think, well, this is how it happens. With Twitter, when Twitter was usable a long time ago, or was still Twitter, it was quite interesting because they will assign you a gender based on what you clicked. So you can know, based on your behavior, if you were female or male, and you could then sort of try to contest this. So these are just general thoughts about this relation between data protection and gender. And what's interesting, in my last minutes, I will devote to just tell you there are now two very nice judgments of the Court of Justice of the European Union, which are precisely about this, about people using data protection, more specifically the GDPR, to contest, to put some message across about gender. So I don't know if you heard about them, just for you to know. One is called Deldit, and it's about Hungary. It's about an Iranian who sought asylum in Hungary as a trans person. They were born female. They went to Hungary. They said, I'm a trans person. Give me asylum. They were there, and then Hungary said, OK. And then once they were there, they wanted to have the register changed because it still said it's the female. They said, now I was trans, now I'm male. And Hungary has to comply with many human rights laws, so they have to respect this, but they forgot to actually tell you how you can do this, so there's no legal procedure to do this. And the person said, well, what I can do is I can use the GDPR to say this information is inaccurate, the information that you have, it doesn't correspond to my actual gender, which is now male. So a huge debate, what does it mean to have accurate gender information? And eventually the case ended up in Luxembourg, and the court said, indeed, you can use the GDPR for this. We don't really care if Hungary decided that there's no official procedure for you to change your gender, but if you can provide evidence that your gender is now male, this is fine. So very interesting case. Another interesting case called Moose. That's a French case, and this was an NGO in France annoyed by the fact that the French SNCF, for you to buy a train ticket, they will ask you, are you monsieur or madame? And it's a very, very interesting case because in the end, the answer was, yes, probably they don't need to ask you if you're monsieur or madame. And very, very interesting, all the hesitations in the judgment about what kind of data is monsieur, madame. And in the French version, it's about formule de politesse, but in the English version, they said it's titles that can reveal your gender. So we are not assuming that because you clicked on madame, you think you're female, but maybe you are. Is this now data that you infer? Is this something that you collect? It is quite ambiguous and therefore quite interesting. Just the final message to tell you that it's a very, I think, hot topic for the future. We have now this interesting case law, but we also have a very interesting debate in the United Kingdom. Probably you have heard there was a court ruling saying, for the purposes of a certain law, the real gender is the one that in your birth certificate. And now this debate is sort of moving into data protection. They are reforming their data protection laws. There is a reference about what the gender that digital providers can use. And then they are trying to say, well, digital providers can no longer infer your gender, just randomly attribute your gender, but they have to go back to your real gender. So again, I think it will be an interesting topic that maybe next year I can tell you more about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So one thing that I forgot to mention, we are going to group the questions in the end for the sake of time, unless there are online questions that I think there are not. So we can move on. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Arturas Grumulaitis, who is a lawyer and PhD candidate at the Vilnius University in Lithuania. And he will examine the use of text and data mining techniques to train generative AI models and the challenges that these bring to copyright and intellectual property rights. So, Arturas.
Okay, dear conference organizers, panelists, guests, and participants, I'm very grateful to be here on this conference. As said, I'm a lawyer and PhD candidate at Vilnius University, and today I would like to present you my research paper on topic legal challenges of text and data mining in the era of generative AI. So artificial intelligence technology is transforming entire industries and reshaping how we understand and approach creativity. Its development relies on vast amount of data, which must be collected, prepared, and processed carefully. The process of deriving high-quality data from different machine-readable resources is called text and data mining. What was the research problem? IP right holders expect that developers of generative AI models will ensure that training data are sourced lawfully with proper authorization and fair remuneration. However, in practice, training data sets are often built from publicly available resources and including copyrighted different works. The inclusion of such works in data sets without explicit permission creates significant tension between IP right holders and AI model creators. Therefore, the main goal of this research was to identify the key legal challenges that appear with text and data mining in the context of generative AI, and to provide insights and the possible solutions for policy makers to improve it. To achieve this, the analysis focuses on existing legal framework and also on the emerging case law that shapes its interpretation. So what is the current legal framework of text and data mining in the European Union? As is well known, copyright is a form of intellectual property that grants the owners exclusive legal right to copy, distribute, adapt, or perform a creative work. Because of the exclusivity of this copyright, works of authorship can be only used with the permission of the authors. So by introducing exceptions and limitations in the copyright law, EU seeks to balance the interest of authors and of those who are using those works. The directive of copyright in the digital single market, harmonizing the copyright issues among the EU member states, introducing two exceptions for text and data mining, allowing researchers for research and for business purposes to use the materials. The first exception, text and data mining for scientific research organizations and cultural heritage institutions, is mentioned in Article 3 of the directive and has no direct link with artificial intelligence. The second exception mentioned in the Article 4, Part 3 of the directive is dedicated for so-called commercial use of the works. It applies only if the copyright holders do not expressly indicate in an appropriate manner, so in the machine-readable form, that they reserve the right to these works. The reservation of rights for text and data mining, it called opt-out possibility, can be expressed in the metadata or in the privacy policy on the website. And this exception is interlinked with AI Act. So the AI Act establishes that providers of the general purpose AI models must put in place the policy that comply with this directive, with this Article 4, Part 3. And it's important to mention that any provider placing a general purpose AI model on the EU market should comply with these transparency requirements, regardless of the jurisdiction. So also the model providers from USA, they also should comply with this regulation. Exception of this rule was made for open source models, unless they are considered to present a systemic risk. So from the first look, such framework should work, actually. We have two exceptions, and AI developers can use it for text and data mining in fully harmonized EU market. But where we have the challenge. The first big challenge comes with the harmonization level. When we look how these provisions of the copyright directive were transposed in the national laws. So from 27 EU countries, only 10 countries extended the scope of the directive. It means that they put also computer programs and databases protected by sui generis rights, allowing text and data mining also from computer programs and from databases. And 11 countries transposed just word by word. So only the copyright holders and related right holders and works are in these countries and could be used for text and data mining. And 6 countries totally delayed the transposition. And only the last autumn, for example, Poland transposed these norms. So if AI developers want to use the text and data mining, they will face significant differences in different EU countries, and this is important to mention here. what we have from the case law perspective, in September 2024, the regional court in Hamburg issued the first ruling which provides valuable insights to the text and data mining for commercial purposes. The court dismissed photographer Robert Kneschke's claim against the German non-profit organization Lion for the unauthorized reproduction of Kneschke's photography through the download from the stock photo agency website for AI training purposes. The court held that lion reproduction by downloading the photo was legally permitted based on the first exception, text and data mining for scientific research, which allows reproductions and extractions made by research organizations and cultural heritage institutions to make way in the lawful way. Main arguments what the court said in this ruling, that was that what is actually the scientific research. The creation of the databases is actually the scientific research. Usually we associate the research with some acquisition of knowledge, but the court said that creation of the data set that will in the future will be used for the testing of AI models, it also could be linked as a scientific research. So from this perspective, is everything okay? So what is then lawful access? The reproduced material was also lawfully accessible to Lion as a photograph was publicly available on the photo stock agency website. According to the directive, lawful access is through subscription or open source licenses, and lawful access should also cover the content that is freely available online. The third argument was that the use of the database was actually not for commercial purposes. The ruling clarifies that for the creation of the database to be considered as a scientific research, it does not have to be used by Lion itself for AI training. It's sufficient that the database is published free of charge, making it available to other AI researchers. So even the use of commercial entities for AI training is acceptable as fair commercial research is still relevant for the knowledge. So this position of the court is very interesting. So the question is when we should use the text and data mining for commercial purposes, if we can take just database made by organization like LIAS for commercial purposes and use it for that. So we never should ask of the copyright holders the question and the acceptance of that. So this is very interesting position of the court. The court also mentioned that the results of the research success is not necessary to qualify the creation of database for scientific research. Not commercial nature of the research. The court stated also that only important factor is that the activity is not commercial. What are you doing with this database after that is not analyzed. And it also, it's a little bit strange position. Cooperation with private companies, usually the text and data mining exception would not be valid if the scientific research organization cooperates with a private partner or private organization. So the court did not consider the fact that Stability AI that used the Lion database influenced Lion researchers by the financing this organization, but for the court it was not a big argument. The next interesting point was that the text and data mining is also made not only for usual purposes but also for AI training. And I think to go a little bit quicker, what I want to mention, what are just the remaining challenges of text and data mining. So of course, this lack of harmonization approach across the member states, as I mentioned, unclear boundary between scientific and commercial exceptions. So when we use the directive Article 3 for scientific research, when we use for commercial purposes, it's after this court decision, it's not really clear. Also, weak implementation and enforcement of opt-out mechanism is ignored or overlooked. Lack of transparency in the AI training databases is important because the transparency requirements we will be valid only in August 25. So until this date, it's free market, and we have no idea what are inside the databases. So also very important, this extraterritorial enforcement and conflict with non-EU regimes, because EU text and data mining and the AI rules have extraterritorial reach, but enforcement is very challenging when databases are compiled in other countries under different regimes. So like fair use doctrine in the US or liberal in Japan. So what are the last slide, my insights and recommendations for all this analysis? That of course we should promote market harmonization in AI governance. So policymakers should prioritize harmonizing the legal framework across the different EU countries to ensure the legal certainty for AI developers, researchers, and also for AI IP right holders. Such inconsistency and inconsistency in the transposition of the rules creates barriers for innovators and especially in the cross-border context. Also, clarify the legal boundaries between exceptions. Link commercial text and data mining not only to opt-out mechanism but also to fair remuneration that the IP holders can have remuneration when are used for commercial purposes. And also avoid this legal fragmentation and make more standardized solutions, and of course to make AI literacy more what we are doing here. So speak about this and discuss about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So no questions online, I think. Okay, so we can move on. So our next speaker is Pratiksha Ashok, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Tilburg University at the Netherlands, and she will talk about dark patterns. So please.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know I'm at the perfect moment when the coffee is run out and lunch hunger is setting in. So I'm going to begin with asking a question by the time that settles in. I'm Pratiksha. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Tilburg University. I work for an EU Horizon 2020 project called AI for Pol, where we discuss AI for policymakers, not only as the subject of regulation, but how we can use it as an object and help policymakers. That's the crux of our study. And one of the questions that we ask is dark patterns and consumer manipulation. So to begin, this works. Okay. How many of you have been dragged to IKEA or begrudgingly gone with your partners on a Saturday morning and been made to walk around those circuitous lines? Yes, no, maybe, yes. So you're all aware that there is this huge flop of show that says, well, we have to walk in this specific line that goes around the shop, and you have to see all the kitchen products and all the bedding, even though you don't want any. And then you come out of IKEA without knowing what you wanted to buy with 17 things that you don't need. This is what happens. And those curious and those attentive at IKEA also know about this very strange gray door that exists. This gray door allows you to cut through all of the circuitous lines and gets you to where you want to go. Or you could just go up away from the elevator to the store where you can buy the things. So you don't have to walk through the shop floor the next time. This was studied by an Austrian architect named Victor Gruen, called the Gruen effect or the Gruen transfer. He also studied a lot of casinos in America where they would pump oxygen, where there are no windows. A lot of malls were built in that, and that was called retail manipulation or consumer manipulation, where when you go into such a mall, you don't know what time it is, whether it's raining outside, what is the outside world about. You have no idea what that means. And this, when happens online, when consumers are manipulated, made to take decisions they didn't want to take, that is called dark patterns. Now, over the next 7 minutes, I will be discussing 4 key aspects of my research. One is an overview of the good, the bad, the ugly of dark patterns in EU law, which is more policy-based, dark patterns in consumer protection, which is more policy-based, and what is the final takeaway of this. So, the good, the bad, the ugly of dark patterns. Firstly, what are they? There's a consensus in the European Union that there's no definition for the term dark pattern. So we'll understand them with examples. An example that all of us, and some of us are aware, is of Duolingo, the language learning app, and the tiny owl that comes and prompts you to say, did you finish your lesson today? And it has these cute graphics that says, are you sure you don't want to complete and lose your streak? Is that a good consumer manipulation? Is that a nudge in a way to get you to finish your language lesson? So not all dark patterns are always bad. They can be good. They become bad when they make you take decisions that have negative consequences. When does it now become ugly is where the AI part of it, AI or the machine learning, the machine usage part of it steps in, and where these dark patterns are created by AI to affect consumers. That is when it starts becoming ugly. And we do not see that future as yet, but that is not a distant future. So, as I said, we don't have a definition for the term dark patterns. As a lawyer, we deal with definitions, and now we only have a conceptual understanding of what dark patterns are, and we understand them with examples. I do not have time to go into all of those examples, but I'll go into one of them, which is my favorite one, which is called roach motels. This is based off of an insecticide device that was created called a roach motel, which is against cockroaches. So you set them where the cockroaches can go inside this roach motel because it's like enticing, but it's like sticky, so they stick onto the roach motel and they can't leave. Similarly, consumers are trapped inside these places and they are unfortunately not able to leave. Another one of these examples is subscription trap. If you do have a basic fit subscription and living in Brussels, try getting out of it. And then tell me if you had any luck, because I did not have any luck when I left Brussels. Examples of dark patterns and consumer manipulation. This is the most intense part of my talk, so I'll try to be as explanatory as possible. As I said, no common definition of what dark patterns are, whereas the DSA and the Data Act delve into what this means. The DSA calls dark patterns as patterns that impair the purpose or affect the judgment of consumers in such a way that it prevents them from taking autonomous or uninformed decisions. Now, that can be a good definition, but it's present only in the recital, it's not present in an article. Similarly, under the Data Act, it takes a different sort of wording where it uses the term where it affects consumers and has negative consequences. As we've discussed, it does not always have to be negative, it could be positive in certain circumstances. The legal framework under the specific articles of the DSA and the DMA don't use the word dark patterns at all. They just call it online design interface, or should not have deceptive online interfaces. And those are the terms that are being used, but not the term dark pattern. And of course, you have the all-famous GDPR, the all-encompassing might, which has a consent-based model. So there's always the argument that can be made is that we have taken the consumer's consent so we can do what we want. But as we all know, that is not true. With this alphabet soup is a larger, bigger policy framework, which is under the GDPR, the DSA, the DMA, and all of us know this alphabet soup. Soup is always good, but if it with all these alphabets, we don't know where the implementation is, where the enforcement is going to lie. We need specific guidelines. We need specific guidelines from the Commission, from the Parliament to say, well, these are what dark patterns are, and this is what we're going to do about them. Then it rises the case of enforcement. We have all of these laws that are present, how are we going to enforce it? Which affects you as a consumer sitting here. If you as a consumer are affected by a dark pattern, if you are impacted by this, and I want to redress, I as a consumer want to redress, what is my steps? What are the steps that I can take as a consumer to go and ask for it? Unlike the case of approaching the European Court of Justice, that might not be the case for everyone. So what is the remedy that I have as a consumer, which is under the consumer protection laws? As you know, consumer protection laws is also not one law, it's a combination of multiple laws, which also do not use the word dark patterns. It uses broad terminology of manipulative patterns, deceptive patterns that are online with the Modernization Directive of 2019. It also doesn't specify if they are dark patterns, deceptive patterns, choice architecture, nudging. All of these terminology exists, but none of them is defined in the law, which means you do not have actual redress. You could file it and argue this under a deceptive pattern, saying, I have been deceived by this, which means that they have to prove intent to deceive, which, again, might not always be the case, which leads to these consumer impacts. One is based on the ambiguity in defining what a dark pattern is, because there are so many dark patterns that exist. With developing technology, there are newer dark patterns that are existing. So what are we going to do about that? And then comes the enforcement difficulties. There's a deterrence against using consumer law itself, because then what is the enforcement? And with the data protection laws, what is consent? If you have given the consent, are you giving arbitrary blanket consent to do whatever you can with your data? And then you have personalization that happens, so the dark patterns that affect me might not affect you. And there's always a difficulty in proving harm, which is the economics argument of this case, because economics would require to provide a market failure. Is there information asymmetry? Is there a specific negative externality that's happening to say that this is a market failure causing regulation? But these are what's called soft harms, where it's a culmination of tiny harms of like excessive spending patterns, spending more time online. And how do you quantify and then regulate these harms? And there is a need to go beyond traditional, regular consumer law, which is made for not the digital era. The last part is where my research comes in, which I'm not going to be discussing today, unfortunately. You can stick to my research and follow me for more content. This is like a YouTube video. Which is more cross-border. As we know, that consumers and dark patterns are not limited by geographic borders of the European Union. We can make regulations in this building or any other building in Europe, but dark patterns are not going to be affected. So what is happening in the US, what is happening in India, those will become relevant. One of the things is the FTC guidelines for click to cancel, but that's one sort of dark pattern. India, on the other hand, developing country, is taking a stand where we have guidelines on dark patterns, where the law says these are inclusive examples of dark patterns, but again, doesn't give a definition, which is good and bad, which means newer dark patterns when they emerge can just be added to that. What is the approach that EU wants to take? Which is my last slide, which is learnings and takeaways. I think I'm 1 minute over time. Which is the call for need for substantive guidelines. Now, the European Data Protection Board has certain guidelines on dark patterns. There are specific patterns that exist, guidelines that exist under the DSA. But what I call for is guidelines under consumer protection law. Why specifically under consumer protection law? Not because I'm a consumer protection lawyer and that would mean more work for me. It just means that it addresses the needs of the consumer. The DSA, the DMA, the Data Act are not enshrined to be consumer protection laws. Though they have impacts on consumers, they're not for the consumers per se. So when you frame your legislation, the narrative has to be for the consumer, which is therefore guidelines under consumer protection law is what I call for. And then a more common definition, once you start defining concepts, it will be more clear what is and what isn't a dark pattern. A bigger policy framework is that fragmented legislation would make enforcement difficult, which is also what Inge Graf, my boss, has said, which is also what Polona wrote in her dark patterns paper by the EPRS. And with that, follow us for more on cross-border dark pattern research. I'm doing more comparative research across multiple jurisdictions, which is the final parts of my research for the project. And if you want more information, I'm always available, even at lunch, even if you don't have time for questions, to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Praktisha. So we'll invite the next speaker, Jochen Spangenberg, who is deputy head of research and cooperation projects at Deutsche Welle in Germany. He will talk about trust, disinformation, and need of verification in a digital age. So, Jochen.
Great. Thank you very much for the introductions. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you also to everybody who makes this event possible here today. Allow me to start with some kind of personal remark, and I feel that's important for the sake of transparency, especially as we're dealing, or as I will be dealing with topics such as disinformation, polarization, independence, trust, impartiality, truth, big word, and the role of media, and you and such like. Now, I have been working in the media for about 30 years. That was how old I am, roughly. And of those 30-odd years, 25 or so have been spent working in public service media. I also studied communication sciences, and I teach occasionally still at university on that. And all that, the fact that I've been working in public service media organization for so long is partly due to luck and also circumstance. But also it owes to a belief that I've held since about my 20s, and that is that I think there is a reason why public service media organizations exist, what they stand for, and what they try and aim to achieve. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying for a moment that everything we have is perfect when it comes to that. Far from it. However, I still think that in today's world, media organizations that are not primarily driven by commercial imperatives have a very important role to play. By this I mean organizations that are driven by other aspects and forces than purely by revenue. And I'm referring to things such as work ethics, certain views of society and their audiences, and I think most people would refer to them as citizens, not as consumers. That has been mentioned a number of times already. And also having a particular approach to how things are covered and how this is done. Now, as I work for one such organization, Deutsche Welle, and with all this said beforehand, you know how to take what I'm saying next and sort of put it somehow into context, because the result of what we say is also largely a product of our socialization, be it in work or privately. And I feel, as I said beforehand, this is quite important also for the sake of transparency. Now, zooming in on the topic of my talk, which is headlined Trust, Disinformation, and Verification, allow me to address this bit by bit. Trust, disinformation, and verification. Trust is something that is very hard to earn, but also very easy to lose. If you work in news media, you have to earn it again and again, day in and day out. I still remember very vividly when I was working at the BBC in the 1990s, a very famous colleague of mine once said, and here's a quote, "We get it right 1,000 times and nobody gives a toss and quickly forgets about it." That's what people expect. But when we get it wrong once, everybody remembers. That's why our aim should always be to try our very best to get it right. Now, that's not an easy task, but a very, very worthwhile one. And a challenge for sure in today's very fast-paced news cycles, all that in a world in which, at least in theory, everybody can be an information disseminator just with a digital device like that. So trust, that is one of our primary assets, and here I mean in particular news media organizations that aim to report fairly, transparently, independently, and impartiality. Again, big words, we could talk about this for hours or days, could even have seminars on that, but I leave it at that. And I would even say that when you're working in public service media, at least, that is sort of our business model. What we mustn't forget, though, in this context is that there are various forces and actors that try and do exactly the opposite, or better, they want to undermine media that strive to be independent and impartial because they have their own agenda. These agendas can be political in nature or financially motivated and driven. But we as a society or individuals, we need to be aware that this is happening and why this is happening. Namely the sowing of distrust or undermining trust. And this is also where I think we need the support of various actors and sectors. Very high on the list are people active in this building here, namely politicians and political parties, at least those that subscribe to democracy, freedom of the press and such like, and also believe in free and pluralistic society. Because, and this is something we are seeing more and more, numerous actors have a profound interest in spreading something that I will talk about next, namely the second item on my list, disinformation. Now, the emergence of social networks and developments in digital technology, they have resulted in fundamental changes, both in the way information is consumed and also delivered or disseminated. Traditional or news media organizations like the one I work for no longer function as so-called gatekeepers. And as I said, anybody with a digital device that can go online can be such a disseminator of information, but primarily in a technical sense. Also, if you have money, you can buy or develop, also destroy, certain platforms that allow for information dissemination in a new way. And prime example is what Mr. Musk has done to Twitter, and is now doing on X, sort of turning it into his private mouthpiece. So when we look at social networks generally, and also important to note, almost all of them are commercially funded. It's not the truth value or the information that matters most, but other things such as content that polarizes, emotionalizes, and results in interaction in whichever way. In other words, anything that creates clicks and can be monetized. That's what matters. Now, it is important not only we in this room here are aware about these dynamics, but ideally that citizens, I don't call them consumers, that citizens are aware of that too. And by that, I think it requires quite a lot of work, especially in the form of education. Another keyword is media literacy, and there's a lot to be done there as well. Now, with this as a sort of snapshot, allow me to move to the third and final component of my talk, and that is headline verification. So this is where we not only have sort of so-called legacy media or old media or traditional media, but also so-called fact-checking organizations. They've been established primarily in Europe over the past 6 or so years, and it's almost like a new ecosystem. Another disclaimer, also for the sake of transparency, I'm in the board of EDMO. EDMO is the European-supported primary initiative against disinformation, and also the two so-called hubs, SETMO and GUTMO. So when I said politicians earlier, so this one here is lying out there. Naya Benson has published this, so I'm not going to go deep into policy issues and what the EU has done apart from EDMO, but if you're interested in that, I recommend this as a read because it summarizes on 12 pages very well what the European Union has done on the political level here. Anyway, sort of moving back to fact-checking, one could also argue that journalists, or that's what journalists do all the time anyway, Well, I agree to some extent. However, advances in technology and the sort of ever-increasing amount of dissemination that is out there, I don't have to tell you what is happening and who's posting what, that's why it became really important to sort of set things right and correct what others are spreading if it is untrue, especially when it comes from people or channels with enormous reach and vested interests. The downside, why fact-checking is vitally important these days, those who are doing it are always running behind. They are not creating any new narratives or setting topics, but it's like, I don't know if you know the game, whack-a-mole. It's just like you can never win. You try, you hit one and then another one pops up. So it can be really frustrating and yeah, not only frustrating, also quite tiring when you talk about fact-checkers about their work, but it's still nevertheless very important. So another dimension I also want to address here is when I talk about verification is technology itself. On the one hand, and I said it before, technological developments have really allowed for all this to happen, and that also allows for the spreading of disinformation, but it could also be used by those who are fact-checking and doing verification, these advancements, and support them in their work. But this also implies learning and knowing of respective tools that are out there, but also developing new tools that help you and support you in your work if you're in that business. And the EU is playing a very important role here. The EU has supported and funded a number of projects, research projects in that sphere. I'm involved in one called Vera AI, which is ending later this year, which I think is very, very successful. And so what I would, if I were to voice a request towards the EU, I would say, please keep that up, give support to these projects, make sure that once project ends, the results also are carried forward. And also I think what is important to have that link not only with the technology side, but also with social science. We've had that before. I think we could even do more. And these are different words, and that's why it's also good to have an event like today where these different fields and sectors are coming together. Now, generally, I would say countering disinformation is more important than ever. I assume, I don't know, but I assume that most of you agree here. And it is a hard one. Sometimes I could also use a metaphor, cat and mouse game, sort of what there is these days from face swapping to audio manipulations and what have you, but others have talked or will talk about that. So it is important that fact checkers can keep up to this and not get left too far behind. So looking at the time, I think my time has come. So while I could talk about this for hours, I am happy to continue the conversation in the break or at lunchtime or whatever. But let me just quickly summarize or conclude briefly. So I'd say there's a number of challenges and threats out there, especially if we agree that guarding our democracies is something that unites us, as is living in free and democratic societies. And to protect and safeguard all this, or even let it prosper, it requires efforts on a variety of levels. One such level I've mentioned is the fact-checking community, but also the news media community or news media organizations, because they really strive to report as accurately as possible. They don't always get it right, we're human, but they strive to and aim for. And do so with respective technologies at hand. That is something that has been discussed yesterday and today, so that is important. Now, and in addition to checking and correcting disinformation, I think it's also important not to forget that resources are needed and required that allow media organizations, storytellers to tell their own stories, to create their own narratives instead of just debunking. Stories that matter to audiences, because I think ultimately it will be audiences and individuals who will decide about the future of media organizations and also media system. So I think it's time to act or continue to act, and I would argue also to pick up speed and intensity on various fronts, because a lot is at stake. And with that, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that each of the talks could follow many hours because they are very interesting, and I'm sorry to ask each of you to stick to the time. So let's welcome our last speaker today, Fabio Giglietto, who is a full professor in the Department of Communication Sciences at the Università degli Studi di Urbino Carlobo in Italy.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction and for the invitation. I will start by, I will basically talk about how transparency is important in terms of understanding what's going on disinformation in the context of the social media and the platforms we are all well known. And I would like to start from a quote by UI Banker, which is one of the most well-known researchers in this field, who once said, "Evidence of action is not evidence of impact, but how do we measure impact?" We know that a lot of information operations are going on these platforms every day, but the point is, are they actually having an impact? But why it is so difficult to measure this impact? This impact is extremely difficult to be measured in itself, but it is made basically impossible by the lack of data. So that's why I want to talk about transparency and how much transparency is important. And my talk will be specifically based on my experience with the Meta Content Library, which for those who doesn't know, it is the replacement that Meta comes out to substitute CrowdTangle, which was a well-known platform used by many researchers and stakeholders to fight disinformation. And I will point out how we started from the needs of the Vera AI user, which was just mentioned. We summarize this need in 3 pillars. And these pillars are, no matter the presentation, the fact that our users told us that they basically want to being able to monitor these platforms, to being able to detect in an effective way, because for them, for fact checkers, the scale is an issue. They really want something which tell them where they have to spend their time on. So they need something which also help them to detect quickly if something, for example, a piece of content in image or a video has been manipulated. And on the other hand, they told us that they want to discover. Discover, it's the part where you start from one piece of content that has been deemed as problematic and you expand it to the narrative behind this claim and also to the network of the accounts who pushed this claim. And once you have this network of accounts, then you can feedback on the monitor process because you can start monitoring this account who have been deemed responsible for sharing this known problematic content. So the idea of this circular approach is at the base of the 9-step workflow that we designed and implemented first for the Italian election 2022, and this led to a study which is already published and described 3 cases of coordinated networks that we detected through this process, which starts from monitoring known coordinated accounts. It monitors the content produced by these accounts periodically. It analyzes coordination across this content, and eventually it identifies automatically new accounts joining this network of coordinated accounts to be monitored in the future. So the idea of this cycle is very, very crucial for us. This 9-step flow was also implemented on a global scale for the Vera AI project, and we ran this project for almost 1 year, and we identified a number of cases of problematic content and new coordinated accounts, as it was expected. And at a certain point, this workflow was mainly designed on CrowdTangle, we started thinking, okay, we don't have CrowdTangle anymore, but we have the meta content library. Let's see if we can port the same idea to the meta content library. And in theory, this is possible. And I have to add that my experience with the meta content library is not just in terms of a user, but I also consulted for Meta, trying to make this tool as useful for a researcher like me as possible. And I will tell you in a moment why and if I succeed. The main idea there is that, as you probably know, the meta content library, unlike CrowdTangle, is conceived to be used within a clean room digital environment, which already tells you that it makes impossible to run the rapid alert system, which was at the base, it was one of the main features of our model, because the idea was to monitor these accounts, to surface problematic posts, and of course to alert stakeholders in case something interesting appears to going on. But if you are running this thing inside a clean room without a connection from the clean room to the internet, it's pretty clear that you can't have any rapid alert. You can't move any kind of data from that. But there is more. The meta content library was conceived to be based on a set of ID system, which is completely disconnected from the ID system you can use on Instagram and Facebook. So basically you have two different ID systems, which means that even if I realize that something which a certain ID in the API of the meta content library is problematic, this ID won't really mean anything to someone who doesn't have the meta content library, because there is no way to move from this internal ID to the ID used by the account/post on the platform. And this is a huge problem. And it was really at the base of the way the meta content library has been conceived. The third point is a little bit more technical, and maybe it can be addressed. The current implementation of the API within this clean room doesn't allow to schedule a task, basically, because the session you get is limited in time, and because the scheduling processes that you usually have on a virtual machine is completely disabled on purpose. So you can basically run this process every 6 hours, as we were used to do in our implementation on CrowdTangle. So this is just to tell you that sometimes it takes time to understand if a platform is complied with the idea of transparency, because without really going on and spending time with this platform, it is very, very difficult to be sure that what you want to achieve is actually achievable. And this took for me and my team a huge amount of time. We also worked on, and I will close here, we also worked with the API of TikTok and YouTube. But let me also say that we didn't really work on the API of X because we applied for the X API researcher program, and our application was denied because apparently our work within the context of the Vera AI project that Johan just described, so this fighting disinformation, it seems to be not in line to the systemic risks of the Digital Service Act. So quite weird, but I want to leave you with this point. And that's it.
So thank you very much. So I want to thank all the speakers for sticking to the time and for having such an intense and very interesting talks. So we have a few minutes for questions. So is there anybody in the room or online any question for the speakers? Yes?
Yes, Laima Inchuta from University of Amsterdam. I have a question for Pratiksha. Do you think the upcoming Digital Fairness Act will sufficiently address the issues you were talking about?
Thank you for that. As much as the Digital Fairness Act is concerned, again, it's more of a horizontal piece of legislation. It's not vertical, it's not specifically related to that. All of these pieces of legislation, whether it's the DSA, the DMA, the Data Act, the Digital Fairness Act, the AI Act, whatever part it's enforced, all of these address some sort of dark pattern to some extent. I'm not saying all of it is good. I'm not saying they're addressing all of the dark patterns. As I said, one of them is to click and cancel, one click, one cancel, as easy as that. That's been addressed in detail. Will the Digital Fairness Act completely address all of the dark patterns? I'm a little hesitant to say an authoritative yes. I have to see where it's enforced, maybe to an extent, yes, but authoritatively blanket, no.
Any other question? Yes?
Also for you. I really enjoyed your presentation. Your first example made me think on the Duolingo, because what I see is that we're overwhelmed by information, right? Because we have our digital devices, computers, left and right, you get information, right? So even though these kind reminders would seem harmless, right, in terms of, what did you call them, dark patterns, the truth is that they're time thieves also, right? And they induce people to maybe do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. What is your view on that?
I absolutely agree. So as I said, quantifying such a harm is what I call soft harms. So again, it's stealing your time, they're stealing your money, you endlessly doom scroll on certain devices. Again, how do you quantify that harm in terms of economic harm to regulate that? So that becomes difficult, but of course they're time thieves. The part that the dark patterns are quote-unquote good dark patterns is, let's say, a reminder that your airplane leaves at some time, that Google Calendar does. A reminder that certain events, birthdays are happening. You could always turn those notifications off, consent-based model. But again, to quantify, how do you quantify that harm that exists? So that can be difficult. So that's why I say they're good in terms that they're nudging you to learn the language, to get to your flight on time. But at the end of the day, they are manipulating, sort of making you take decisions that you normally would not take. That is what a dark pattern is.
Any other question or comment?
Hi, this is Claudio from the previous panel. I'm curious, it's a general question for any of you. How do you link your presentations, this information, etc., with the AI factories, with the upcoming AI Academy, and also with the need for a European hyperscaler? So any thoughts? More than welcome on this.
Maybe I can say something about how do I see the Digital Services Act could be used to better understand what people are doing with this interactive chatbot, which is going to be clearly used by a huge amount of people. This is pretty clear. And I know that the artificial intelligence field is super complex, and there are so many things to look into to be sure we are getting the right policies. But there is one service which is this interactive chatbot, which is getting massively popular. And it is a service. So in my view, at least the chatbots should, or the provider of chatbots, should be mandated to provide some data to researchers, exactly in the same logic that we ask social media platforms to provide data to researchers. And I think this is something that we should probably consider more?
Fourfold answer. I think we need to be aware of the implications of such activities and actors, number one. Number two, we need to raise awareness among citizens or consumers or individuals, whatever you want to call them. Politicians may want to think about regulation. We've heard earlier that it always lags behind, but still it's a powerful means. And finally, we as media organizations, we should be in a position to report about what's happening without having to fear any sort of negative impact, and also having the means to do so, because as you probably know, investigative reporting is very, very expensive, and a society has to decide whether they want this to take place or whether they want, because commercially it just doesn't work. Advertising funded investigative reporting is very difficult. So that's also what we as this society have to decide. Are we supplying those people who work in, let's call them quality media or whatever, legacy media, are we willing to support that also financially?
Thank you. Any other question?
Hi, thank you. Also from the first panel. My question's for Joachim. It's quite easy when in conversation around false information to see all of this in quite dystopian terms, but do you see a scope for a kind of a renaissance of kind of public service media, for example, by kind of building and kind of managing their own AI models? And do you say in the same way that, you know, when we kind of go back to the 90s, the 2000s, we looked at the kind of the movement online. Public service media often did that really well, with the BBC in mind, thinking about that. Can you see scope for another positive transition, which would actually increase trust in public services and what we see and hear around us?
Yeah, good one, challenging one. I don't have the glass ball. I hope so, and to some extent, maybe yes, because I mean, one of our biggest challenges for all public service media organizations is reaching young audiences. I mean, that's really, really hard. Very often, we still reach the over 50s or over 60s, but the under 30s, difficulty. So how to reach them with content that matters? You mentioned the BBC. For example, the BBC did something really fantastic, which is called Bite Size, I think was called like educational programs. I mean, I have kids, my kids are bilingual and binational. So they used the BBC because it helped them to perform their studies. So it was really useful to them. So that way, using that vehicle, the educational programming and materials, they became BBC news consumers as well, because it was just on one platform. So that's one thing that can be done that may work, and I think it's quite a successful one. Another one is, again, using my children as an example, the poor lads always had to sit through the media I consumed, which was the main German news bulletins. Now, today, they don't consume them on television in a linear fashion, but they consume them in very different settings and channels, namely on Instagram especially, time shifted or so, but they're used to the brand and they know what kind of brand it is. So that is something that works, and that's where also education comes in as well. I think it matters a lot how children are brought up. So this is partly the responsibility of parents, but also the responsibility of schools and education systems to teach them. I'm doing that as sort of as a sidekick. I go into schools for an organization based, in fact, here, lie detectors, and I see, I briefly mentioned that to you in our talk beforehand, it's so important to do that young people are made aware of, the dynamics that happen on social platforms also, but also are taught what journalism is, because very often they don't have a clue. If I mentioned working or having worked as a journalist or so, they just sometimes look at me and think, what is journalism? I mean, I get these questions. They don't even know where we would say basics. So there's so much to do. And one conclusion could be just give up and let's just see what happens. Another one is just take action. And I mean, I know I'm not going to change the world, but I can just do maybe a little drop in the ocean. So that's what I'm doing. And I think if we as a society, again, agree that there's our democracies and our ways of living are in danger, and B, we are not sitting back idly and do something about it, then there's opportunities and yeah, there's something to do. And finally, again, coming to the question, is there a renaissance maybe? I hope so, but it's just only works together. So not only from those who do it, and as I said beforehand as well, I mean, there's lots of things that could be done differently. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but if there's a support in society, and if we provide, or public service media organizations provide something for the people out there, something that matters, something that helps them, not getting into grips, but mastering their lives, something that is useful, then there's a role to play. If we don't provide anything of any use to anybody, well, scrap us. So that's also the challenge we have to face. But again, not everything works only in a commercial setting. And I mentioned investigative journalism.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes?
Hello, I'm Natalia Diaz-Rodriguez, professor at the University of Granada, and I recently heard that after Trump came into power, so this is for the last two speakers mainly, the content moderation team was disabled, let's say shut down, so this is really worrying, and I would like to ask your opinion on what can we do as educators, as researchers, and to inform society that this is like put on fire, misinformation. And from your opinion, what can we do? What's the role of explainability, for instance, and what could be good ways to fight this? Because I think, yeah, the democracy is getting undermined by lacking the trust among us, who will be sharing this not only in Facebook, WhatsApp, so everything is connected. So I think this is, the world is doomed when we don't put solutions. So I want to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Okay.
There are no questions for me, so I take the liberty to intervene, because I've been involved in the past in teaching data protection. So privacy, the importance of teaching privacy data protection in schools to children. And I was quite amazed because everybody agreed that you have to teach children about privacy, and basically it was for them to be secure. And I realized that sometimes we are a bit hypocritical in the way in which what we want to teach. We also manipulate them. We want them to, yes, know about privacy so you don't share and you are safe. But for instance, we as parents will actually invade their privacy regularly, and Microsoft will help us track them everywhere all the time. So I think it's important that we teach them all these important values of democracy, also by learning ourselves that we respect and that we teach them, you have your right to privacy, therefore I respect your right to privacy. That it's an important way of doing this, of really teaching by giving the good example that we ourselves respect the rights.
I can just add that we should have respect of each other. Actually, each constitution of each country protects our rights, but in this area that we respect our rights. So just to be patient and when we think about the privacy, then my privacy is important, but the privacy of neighbor is not more important. So just I think through this literacy to discussions, we should respect each other, and then it works. Thanks.
I'm going to give you a completely different perspective because I'm Indian, and in Indian culture and society, there's nothing called privacy. Everyone knows everyone else's business. It's very communal. It's also good that your neighbor looks into your house if something terrible is happening. If you're away for a month, they look into your house and they take care of you. And privacy is an alien concept to my parents. It's an alien concept to my family. They're like, what do you mean privacy? What private information do you have that you can't tell us? So it's very different culturally. And to make them understand because they are from a different generation to like, okay, teaching them that one, this is privacy, and now with them using Instagram and YouTube and them coming to across all of this content, it's very difficult to make them realize that some content online is AI generated, is fake. And for us, maybe it's easier to spot it. For them, it might not be as easy to spot it, to tell them, well, you know, this is okay, this is not okay, this is AI. You have to start recognizing that. So it's not, in as much as it's teaching our children, it's also teaching the elderly, because they might be badly affected by scams, by activities that happen online, and laws might not be tailored towards them, because the society sort of forgets you after you're 60. So yeah, both ways is where privacy should spread.
Is it working? It is working, isn't it? Quick answer, explain and be transparent. Be transparent about your sources, be transparent about your research and the conclusions you reached and how and why you reached them. That's important, I think. So be transparent, but you may not reach everybody. So if someone is already very deep down in the rabbit hole, it's unlikely that you can reach them as well. So you have to choose your battles wisely. And you said about content moderation, that is exactly what content moderators are facing. So you can't do every comment that is posted somewhere, because that's also a tactic, a strategy. Just keep them busy, those content moderators, so they're drowning and have nothing else to do. So that's what I meant by people also need time to tell their own stories and narratives instead of just all this like playing whack-a-mole. Do you want to add to that? Or?
I'm not going to add anything for sake of time.
All right. Any last question? Yeah. I think we're out of the time. So I'm sure that you have plenty of other questions. I invite you to continue the conversation after the conference or on further editions of the conference. I want to take the final word for thanking everybody who has made this possible and thanking the EPRS for hosting this event today. And as I say, I invite you to continue, because if anything proves this session, the previous day, is that all these topics deserve further consideration and discussion. So thank you all for all your participation.